Under the silver hush of night, the land sleeps. Beyond the city of Xi'an, where modern lights dim and fields stretch into shadow, the earth itself seems to exhale. Nothing moves. The air is thick with the scent of soil and the faint whisper of insects. It is an ordinary landscape, quiet farmland, broken by furrows and low mounds, yet beneath its calm, something ancient breathes. 2,000 years of silence lie just underfoot, waiting, patient as stone. The wind glides across the fields, carrying no hint of what lies below, no clue that beneath this calm surface, the greatest army in history still stands, an army that never lived, yet never died. Once, men walked here without knowing what pressed against their boots. They ploughed and planted, harvesting wheat above the heads of warriors moulded from the same earth. Generations came and went, and still the soil held its secret. The rain softened it, the sun hardened it, but nothing broke through. Time, with all its power to erode and erase, became the guardian of silence. It built a cradle around what it buried, until the world forgot to ask what lay beneath. If you listen closely, the ground has a voice. It hums, low, steady, like the pulse of the planet itself. It carries the memory of hands that once shaped clay into faces, of furnaces that burned through the night, of commands whispered by an emperor whose name once ruled the world. But now there is no flame, no footstep, only the weight of centuries pressing downward, sealing the past in perfect stillness. In the pale wash of moonlight, the soil gleams faintly, as though something beneath it reflects. Imagine the camera lowering, inch by inch, slipping through roots and layers of sediment, until darkness folds around you completely. Then shapes, a glimpse of a cheek, the curve of an ear, the hollow of an eye. 1,000 faces emerge in silence, their expressions calm and alert, each one staring toward eternity. They stand shoulder to shoulder in rows that never end, their armor detailed, their hands poised on invisible weapons. It is a scene both haunting and serene, as if a dream of war has fallen asleep inside the earth. These are not mere statues. They are echoes, preserved in clay sentinels built to serve a ruler in death as they once did in life. And yet, no trumpet ever sounded for them. No battle ever called their names. They were made not to fight, but to endure. They stand in formation for a purpose that has long been forgotten, their silence more commanding than any roar of conquest. The greatest army ever assembled never fought a single war because it was never meant to live. Above them, the modern world turns unaware. The faint rumble of distant roads, the quiet hum of power lines, these are the new sounds of empire. But the earth beneath remains untouched, breathing softly, carrying within it a history too vast for the living to hear. The moon crosses the sky like a slow, unblinking eye, tracing the same path it once did over the Emperor's kingdom. Time folds in on itself here, and the distance between centuries collapses into a single moment of quiet wonder. Some say that stillness is the truest form of survival, that to outlast the noise of your own age, you must become part of the earth, patient, unseen, eternal. Perhaps that is what these clay soldiers represent, not power, but endurance, not victory, but memory. They are the Empire's breath held for 2 millennia, waiting for the world to remember. As the camera rises again, the farmland returns rows of crops, the faint outline of a well, a farmer's shadow crossing in the first light of dawn. Life continues as it always has, unaware that beneath its roots lies a kingdom of silence. The whisper fades, replaced by the hum of morning. But the question lingers like mist in the air. Who built such perfection only to bury it? And why must it remain unseen? Before he was a legend carved in stone, he was a child who feared the dark. History remembers him as Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. But behind the armor of titles was a boy who grew up among betrayals and ghosts. He was born in a fractured land, where warlords carved kingdoms like meat from a carcass, and death rode swiftly through every village. To survive was to conquer, and to conquer was to be alone. In that solitude, the seed of his obsession took root, not power for its own sake, but protection from the thing he could never command: time. He rose young, too young perhaps, with eyes that saw not glory but impermanence. Every wall could crumble, every dynasty could fall, every body, even his own, could rot. The thought haunted him more than any assassin's blade. So he began to build a world where nothing would die, a realm that could not decay. His armies marched not just for land, but for control over the horizon. And when at last he united the warring states, binding them beneath his single rule, he believed he had conquered chaos itself. The banners of his empire stretched from the sea to the desert, a new world under one name. Yet even then, in the hush of victory, he could feel it, the slow approach of something he could not defeat. He sought order as if it could shield him. He standardized weights, coins, even the width of the roads. Everything that could be measured, he made uniform. The written word itself was reformed, so that no region could hide behind dialect or tradition. To bring harmony, he erased difference. To bring peace, he silenced dissent. The empire was not only his creation, it was his reflection. Behind every law and edict lay the tremor of fear, that once he was gone, all he had built would dissolve back into dust. The court whispered of his temper, his suspicion, his vanishing joy. Ministers learned to bow longer, to speak less, to survive the moods of a man who had caged himself within his own greatness. He trusted no one, not his generals, not his scholars, not even the physicians who mixed his medicines. Death, it seemed, had many disguises, and he feared them all. The world outside his palace grew richer, but within its walls, the air thickened with incense and paranoia. The emperor ordered the burning of books that contradicted him, the burial of scholars who defied him. Knowledge became his enemy because knowledge reminded him of his limits. And yet, amid the cruelty and control, there was still something deeply human, a longing for peace. He was not content to rule a lifetime, he wished to rule eternity. He commissioned alchemists to search for the elixir of life, sending expeditions across the sea to lands whispered to hold immortality. They never returned. Perhaps they drowned. Perhaps they chose freedom. But the emperor waited, convinced that time itself could be bent if only he commanded hard enough. When the elixir failed to appear, he turned to a different kind of eternity, one that did not require the soul to linger, only the image. It began as a whisper among architects, the idea of building a city beneath the earth. Not a tomb, but a mirror of the empire, a second China, eternal and silent. The project grew in secret, carried out by thousands of workers, artisans, and dreamers whose names would never be recorded. They dug through the loam and clay, shaping chambers vast enough to hold armies, rivers, palaces, even stars. The emperor visited at dusk, wrapped in shadows, listening to the sound of chisels and the steady rhythm of breath. It must have sounded like creation itself, the earth being taught to remember. What drove him was not arrogance, but terror disguised as ambition. In every statue that would later stand guard, he saw a part of himself, a sentinel against the void. To him, death was not an end but an insult, a force that refused his authority. If he could not command time, he would build something that could. And so, the clay soldiers were born not from pride, but from fear's most desperate prayer. Let me continue. Imagine him in the quiet of his final years, standing upon his balcony as the sun dissolved into the horizon, knowing that the light he adored would return without him. He was the emperor of everything except tomorrow. The world beneath his feet was already becoming his refuge, his monument, his disguise. He ordered his artisans to shape the army's faces from real men to ensure that life itself was captured in imitation. Each soldier bore a different expression, a fragment of humanity pressed into the service of eternity. It was beauty, born of desperation, a masterpiece of fear masquerading as faith. The emperor's palace became a labyrinth of maps and measurements, his sleep restless, his meals prepared by trembling servants who tasted each dish before he dared. He lived surrounded by protection, yet trusted none of it. Even as his empire prospered, his mind frayed at its edges. He ordered more walls, more guards, more rituals. The closer he came to immortality, the further he drifted from peace. One night, they say, he walked alone through the corridors of his palace, torch in hand, the flames flickering against golden walls. He paused before a mural of mountains and rivers, the empire he had united. He touched the paint softly, as if it might dissolve beneath his fingers. Perhaps, in that moment, he understood what no emperor could admit, that power can command nations, but not the passing of breath. He united a nation but could not unite himself against time. And when he died, the world did not end. It simply shifted, the way light moves across a tomb at dawn. His body was carried in secret to the resting place he had built for himself, the underground kingdom, where clay breathed in silence, awaiting his return. The man who had conquered all he could see vanished into the soil, and the earth closed over him like a sigh. Yet his dream did not die. It hardened, baked into every soldier's gaze, every sculpted horse, every silent corridor beneath the fields of Xi'an. It waits still, unchanged, reminding the living that even the mightiest empires are born not from strength, but from the fear of ending. They were never meant to be remembered. Their names were not carved into stone or preserved in scrolls. They lived in the half-light of torches, deep beneath the earth, where breath and clay mingled into the same slow rhythm. Each man and there were thousands carried a piece of the emperor's dream in his hands. They were potters, sculptors, blacksmiths and slaves. Some had once shaped jars for grain, others carved idols for temples. But here, their craft was no longer their own. In the sealed workshops of the first emperor, every gesture became an act of obedience, every breath a vow of silence. The air down there was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of earth and ash. Torches hissed against the damp walls, and smoke gathered above their heads like a second ceiling. The sound was constant, the scrape of tools, the slap of wet clay, the low murmur of workers who no longer spoke of home. Day and night blurred into one long dusk. The emperor's orders were simple: build an army worthy of eternity. And so they did. Each soldier began the same way, a rough form pulled from the mud, shaped on a wheel or pressed by hand, then built up layer by layer until a body emerged. The artisans worked in silence, but their work spoke loudly. A turn of the wrist shaped a shoulder, a touch of the thumb formed a cheek. They gave life without breath, expression without emotion. The clay cooled slowly, hardening into men who would never move. Every statue carried a fingerprint, but whose? The question drifts unanswered through the centuries, as invisible as the workers themselves. They were bound not by chains, but by secrecy. The emperor's tomb was the most sacred of projects, and no one was permitted to speak of it beyond its walls. It was said that once a craftsman finished his work, he was led away, his knowledge buried with him. Some stories whisper that entire teams vanished into the tomb when it was sealed, entombed beside their creations. Whether that is true or not, no one living can say. What remains is the silence. A silence so deep it feels alive. For the artisans, time must have lost its meaning. They worked beneath the surface for years, seeing little of the sky. In that dim world, the clay became a kind of scripture, each detail a prayer for endurance. They moulded armor with the precision of memory, etched patterns into sleeves, pressed treads into soles. Even the horses had veins in their necks, as though the sculptors could not bear to make them less than real. Some soldiers wear faint smiles, others look stern or weary. Perhaps those faces were not imagined at all, but borrowed portraits of the men who made them. And yet, for all their individuality, the soldiers stand together in perfect formation. The artisans worked with one vision, one purpose, one fear. The emperor's inspectors moved through the workshops like shadows, ensuring no mistake would mar his immortality. To fail was to vanish, to succeed was to disappear more quietly. Still, the makers continued, shaping, carving, painting, burning. Their devotion was not to the emperor alone, but to the act of creation itself. In giving life to clay, they touched something divine, even if their divinity went unspoken. Imagine the moment a figure was finished, its face smooth, its eyes empty. A brush dipped in pigment brought it to life, colour by colour. Black for the hair, red for the lips, bronze for the armour. Under torchlight, they must have looked alive. 1,000 men watching from the shadows, their gazes unblinking. Then the artisans stepped back, and for the first time saw what they had done, an army that breathed in silence, waiting for command that would never come. Perhaps, as they looked upon their work, some felt pride, others fear. To create something so perfect that it no longer belonged to you that was both triumph and tragedy. The statues were no longer clay, no longer craft. They were the emperor's soul multiplied 1,000-fold. And when the orders came to seal the chambers, to close the earth above them, the makers obeyed. Some wept, some prayed, some whispered their names into the air, hoping the walls would remember them even if history would not. As the last torch was extinguished and the final echoes faded, darkness reclaimed the chambers. The air stilled. The army slept. Above, the artisans' footsteps disappeared into the soil, leaving only their fingerprints pressed into eternity. The clay cooled, the pigments faded, but their touch endured invisible signatures on an immortal surface. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, and the world forgot the hands that shaped the emperor's dream. Yet when the tomb was uncovered 2,000 years later, the faces stared back calm, alert, alive. The makers in the shadows had succeeded. They had defied time without ever knowing it. The camera drifts deeper now, beyond the last of the workshops, into the sealed darkness, where their work still waits untouched, unseen, and breathing faintly beneath the weight of ages. There is a place beneath the hills of Xi'an that no one has seen for over 2,000 years. It lies beneath a mound of earth shaped like a sleeping mountain, untouched, sealed, and breathing in silence. Archaeologists stand above it in awe, instruments in hand, afraid to disturb what the centuries have guarded so well. The locals call it the Emperor's Tomb, but those who study it know another name, the Forbidden Chamber. For within it, the first emperor of China still lies in his imagined eternity, untouched by air, unbroken by light. They say the air inside his tomb could kill not because it's poisoned, but because it's pure. 2 millennia have passed without a single breath of intrusion. No bacteria, no moisture, no modern corruption. To open it would be to collapse the only untouched atmosphere left from an ancient world. It is not merely sealed by stone, it is protected by time itself. The archaeologists who peer into its depths through ground-penetrating sensors describe it like a dream frozen in amber, a world that continues to exist just beyond human reach. Legends describe rivers of mercury flowing around the emperor's coffin streams meant to mimic the great waterways of China. The ancient texts say his tomb was a perfect replica of the empire he ruled. Palaces for the gods, stars on the ceiling that glowed with gemstones, and the world itself recreated in miniature. The rivers were not metaphor, but alchemy, mercury, the element of immortality coursing endlessly beneath the ground. Modern tests of the soil confirm the stories. Mercury levels hundreds of times higher than normal, shimmering veins of silver death beneath the clay. Perhaps they were meant as protection, or perhaps as illusion so that even in death, Qin Shi Huang would rule a universe that obeyed only him. But the tomb was more than a palace. It was a machine of secrecy. Ancient records speak of traps, crossbows rigged to fire upon intruders, chambers designed to collapse if breached. The emperor's paranoia did not end with his final breath. It was engineered into stone. Some believe that the architects themselves were sealed within when the work was complete, their last breaths spent ensuring the traps were set. Their silence became the foundation of his immortality. To this day, no one knows if those defenses still sleep below, waiting for movement that never comes. The scientists who study the site move carefully, reverently. They could dig, they have the tools, the technology, the will, but they hesitate. For once the seal is broken, the ancient air will vanish forever, a single exhale lost to modern contamination. Even the clay soldiers, unearthed from nearby pits, turned pale within hours of exposure. Their colours reds, blues, golds faded, the moment oxygen touched them. If the tomb were opened, its contents might disintegrate in the same instant, the dream collapsing into dust before human eyes could even adjust to the dark. So the emperor remains undisturbed. In the quiet, his legend has only grown. Some say his spirit still walks the corridors of his underworld, counting his soldiers, whispering commands to the silent army. Others imagine him seated on a throne of gold, surrounded by rivers of mercury that glow like molten mirrors, reflecting the constellations above. Whether these images are truth or myth hardly matters. Their power lies in the not knowing. The unseen becomes the star, and what we cannot witness becomes sacred. There is something deeply human in the restraint that has kept the tomb sealed. For once, curiosity bows to reverence. Scientists, usually driven by discovery, have agreed to wait to let mystery breathe. The first emperor, who once tried to conquer eternity, has succeeded in a way no mortal ever could. His silence remains absolute, his secrets intact. In the age of satellites and scanners, he is the one man the modern world still cannot uncover. At night, the mound glows faintly under the moon, surrounded by quiet fields and the soft hum of wind through wheat. Farmers work the soil nearby, their ploughs cutting just shy of the invisible line where history begins. Beneath their feet, entire chambers sleep, arranged with mathematical precision. In the deepest one of all, at the center of a labyrinth, the Emperor lies surrounded by things no one alive has seen. Jade ornaments, golden chariots, relics of a vanished faith in immortality. Even now, sensors detect strange voids, symmetrical patterns that suggest palaces, gates, and corridors stretching for miles underground. The Earth, it seems, has swallowed a kingdom whole, and perhaps it wishes to keep it that way. Every attempt to probe deeper ends in hesitation, as though some ancient agreement between the living and the dead still holds sway. The archaeologists step back. The soil closes again. The silence continues. The forbidden chamber endures as the last untouched world, not lost, but waiting. A single layer of earth separates the living from the dreams of a man who once ruled millions. The temptation to open it burns quietly in the hearts of those who study it, but they know that some mysteries, once revealed, can never be restored. To disturb the tomb would be to end it. And so they wait, as the earth has waited, patient, watchful, respectful. Above the mound, dawn begins to spread its pale light. Mist drifts low, and the ground shimmers faintly with dew, hiding what it protects. The field looks ordinary again, just another piece of land. But those who stand there know better. Beneath that calm, an empire still sleeps, its walls untouched, its emperor eternal, its silence heavier than any crown. Soon, another kind of story will stir. The story of the modern world of the day. The ground finally spoke again, and history woke from its long, deliberate sleep. It began with thirst. The year was 1974, and the land outside Xi'an had grown dry beneath a sun that refused to soften. The farmers worked in silence, their shovels striking dust instead of moisture. They were digging for a well, not for history, not for glory, only for water. The fields had cracked like old parchment, and the crops were fading. Each stroke of the shovel was a prayer. Then, one morning, one of them, a man named Yang Zhifa, felt his spade strike something solid beneath the dirt. It gave a sound that was neither stone nor soil, a hollow echo that seemed to belong to another world. At first, they thought it was just old pottery. The villagers often found relics of the past buried in their fields, fragments of jars, bits of roof tiles, the remnants of forgotten dynasties sleeping just below the roots. But this was different. As they cleared the dirt away, the shape beneath began to take form, a curve too precise to be natural, a texture too deliberate. Someone fetched a bucket of water, and they poured it slowly, letting the mud loosen and slide away. Then, through the murk, a face appeared. The earth had opened its eyes. It was a soldier, calm, expressionless, carved with such detail that for a moment they thought he might breathe. His lips were slightly parted, his gaze fixed on something beyond time. The farmers froze, their hands trembling between fear and reverence. The well they had been digging had become a doorway, and the silence around them deepened until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They were searching for water and found eternity. Word spread quietly through the village. More digging followed, cautious and uncertain. Each strike of the shovel revealed another fragment. An arm, a hand, the broken edge of armor. What they uncovered was not one man, but many. A rank of soldiers stood beneath the earth, shoulder to shoulder, as if still waiting for orders from a voice that had long since fallen silent. The farmers worked in disbelief, their shovels scraping against the bones of legend. What had been dry farmland was now the skin of an empire. When the local authorities arrived, they too hesitated. The faces staring back from the soil were too alive, too precise. They seemed to be listening. Officials took notes, measurements, photographs, and then sealed the site until archaeologists could come. The villagers stepped back, their hands still caked with the dust of 2,000 years. That night, none of them slept well. The air felt different, charged with something vast and unspoken. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and iron, like a memory stirring after a long dream. Soon, the scientists arrived, men in wide hats and quiet voices, moving carefully through the trenches. They brushed away centuries with soft tools and measured silence. What they uncovered was only the beginning. The first pit revealed hundreds of figures. Soldiers standing in precise formation, their eyes forward, their postures ready. Rows stretched into darkness. Each one was unique. Faces lined with character, mouths caught mid-breath. fingers resting on weapons that had not rusted. The air inside the pit was thick and cool, as though the earth itself had been guarding their sleep. The farmers watched from a distance, unsure of what they had done. They had not found treasure, nor relics meant to be found. They had disturbed something larger, not just a tomb, but a memory that had chosen its own time to wake. The discovery spread beyond the village, then beyond the province, until the world itself began to whisper the name of Xi'an. Journalists arrived, cameras flashed, the quiet pit filled with voices. The sleeping soldiers, after 2,000 years of silence, were forced to face the light again. But in those first days before the fame, before the fences, before the museums and tourists, the discovery still belonged to the earth. The moment was fragile, sacred. The men who found the soldiers were simple farmers, men who understood the patience of soil and the mystery it holds. Perhaps that is why they were chosen, if such things can be chosen. History has a strange way of revealing itself only when the world is ready to listen, and always, it seems, through ordinary hands. As the archaeologists expanded the excavation, the scale became incomprehensible. Thousands of figures, horses, and chariots emerged from the dust, their arrangement so precise that it seemed choreographed by gods. The farmers stood on the edges of the pits, their tools forgotten. The well they had begun for survival had become a passage into legend. Beneath their feet lay an empire that had never truly died, only waited, buried beneath centuries of silence. When the sun set that evening, the fields of Xi'an glowed red, and the first pit shimmered like a wound in the land, not of violence, but of revelation. The villagers returned home quietly, their clothes still streaked with the same soil that once buried kings. Somewhere deep below, in the chambers that remained sealed, the rest of the army slept on. The earth had given up its secret, but not all of it. And as the camera lingers on the darkening fields, the narrator's voice softens. The discovery is complete, but the story is only beginning. For what was found in that well would soon awaken the entire world, turning silence into spectacle and mystery into memory once more. For 2,000 years they waited in peace. Then we woke them. At first, the world did not believe. The story of a buried army, thousands of life-sized warriors hidden beneath a farmer's field, sounded like folklore, another myth from a land already rich with legends. But then the photographs appeared. Grainy, sepia-toned images of faces that should not have survived, soldiers with creased brows, with eyes carved to see beyond centuries. And suddenly, the quiet fields of Xi'an became the center of the earth. By the spring of 1975, caravans of jeeps and trucks rolled into the village. Archaeologists, journalists, and soldiers arrived together, their boots sinking into the same dust that had once sealed the Emperor's secret. The air filled with voices, orders, questions, speculation, all colliding with the stillness that had ruled for millennia. The first excavation tents went up like scars on the land, their canvas walls fluttering in the dry wind. Where the farmers had once dug in silence, there was now the constant hum of generators, the click of cameras, the scratch of pens across notebooks. The soldiers beneath the ground did not move, yet everything around them trembled. Shovels scraped gently, brushes whispered across their clay faces. Each statue emerged like a memory made solid row after row, rank after rank, their eyes frozen mid-watch. The archaeologists knelt among them with reverence, aware that every touch risked erasing what time had preserved. Cameras flashed. Lights reflected off the curved helmets, the lacquered armor, the horses with their still sculpted muscles. The tomb that had been darkness now pulsed with electricity. It was as if time itself had inhaled sharply. Each figure that surfaced deepened the mystery. The army stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined. Not a handful of statues, but thousands, arranged with impossible precision. Infantry, archers, generals, charioteers, everyone unique. Their faces carried emotion, their postures purpose. It was not a repetition of form, but a chorus of individuality. Some stared sternly ahead, others seemed lost in thought. Even the horses appeared restless, their nostrils flared, their ears pricked toward a command that would never come. For the archaeologists, wonder quickly turned to dread. The pigments on the soldiers' armor began to fade within minutes of exposure. The vibrant reds, blues, and greens that had survived 2,000 years vanished into dull earth tones as soon as the light touched them. The air, that invisible destroyer, was undoing the work of ages. What had slept in peace was now dissolving in admiration. They tried to work faster, but the faster they worked, the more fragile everything became. Discovery, they realized, was a form of destruction. Still, the excavation continued. The site was too vast, too extraordinary to pause. News crews arrived from Beijing, London, New York. Each broadcast spoke of the eighth wonder of the world, but the locals called it something simpler, the awakening. They spoke softly about the old stories, how the Emperor's army had been meant to protect him in the afterlife, how disturbing their rest might bring imbalance to the world of the living. In the nearby villages, offerings of incense began to appear at dusk. Even progress, it seemed, required permission from the dead. From above, the excavation pit looked like a wound in the earth, long, rectangular, symmetrical. Inside, the soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, staring upward as if expecting to see their emperor's face once more. The air shimmered with heat and dust, and for a moment, under the glare of floodlights, the soldiers almost seemed alive. Their shadows stretched across the ground like phantoms reuniting with the sun. The living moved among them like intruders. Archaeologists spoke in hushed voices, afraid to break the illusion of eternal stillness. Some said the soldiers seemed to be watching them, that when the light changed, their expressions shifted, ever so slightly. It was nonsense, perhaps, but the feeling lingered, the sense that something vast and silent was observing its own rediscovery. As weeks turned into months, the site expanded. More pits were uncovered, each revealing a new regiment, a new secret. Bronze chariots emerged, their wheels corroded but intact. Weapons glinted faintly, still sharp after centuries underground. The sheer scale defied comprehension. It was not merely a tomb, but a world recreated in clay, an empire remade beneath the surface of the real one. And yet, amid the noise of cameras and cranes, there was stillness. The soldiers did not protest their exposure, they simply endured it, as they had endured time. In their silence, there was dignity, an ancient patience that outlasted human excitement. The archaeologists began to work more gently, almost apologetically. They understood now that they were not uncovering objects but awakening witnesses. By the end of that first year, the Terracotta Army had become more than an archaeological discovery. It had become a mirror. The soldiers, still and solemn, reflected the living world that surrounded them, a world restless, hurried, desperate to capture what could never truly be possessed. And when the final floodlights dimmed for the night, the field returned to quiet. The soldiers, bathed once more in shadow, seemed to breathe again as if grateful for the dark. Perhaps they understood what the living did not, that every revelation comes with a cost, and every secret, once broken, becomes something less than sacred. Above them, the sky of Xi'an shimmered with distant stars, the same ones the emperor had once claimed to rule, the same that watched his army being disturbed at last. History, once asleep, had turned in its bed. Tomorrow, more soldiers would rise from the ground. But tonight, they stood untouched in the silence between past and present witnesses to the uneasy beauty of awakening. 8,000 men, and not one repeated soul. They stand in rows beneath the earth, a still ocean of faces frozen mid-thought. From above, the army seems endless, a tide of terracotta stretching into shadow. But step closer, and the illusion changes. Each figure has a story carved into his silence, a tilt of the mouth, a furrow in the brow, a wrinkle that time could not erase. No two are the same. What the emperor commanded was obedience, but what his artisans created was individuality. In the attempt to immortalize power, they accidentally immortalized humanity. The camera drifts slowly among them, moving from face to face. One soldier gazes forward, jaw set in quiet defiance. Another appears almost gentle, his eyes softened by some long-forgotten kindness. A third looks weary, as if he already knows he will never be called to battle. Together they form not a uniform army, but a choir of expressions stoic, anxious, proud, resigned. Each one a reflection of a living man who once breathed, worked, and feared the same way we do now. It is said that the artisans who shaped them were drawn from across the empire. Potters, sculptors, metalworkers, even prisoners. They came from distant provinces, carrying the dust of their own lands in their hands. Some were ordered, others volunteered, but all were bound by the emperor's vision to build an army that could follow him beyond death. They worked in workshops hidden beneath the surface, where torches burn through endless nights. The scent of clay, sweat, and smoke mixed with the whisper of wet brushes and carving tools. Each face began as a mould, but the details, the features that gave them life, were added by hand. A single touch could define a lifetime. No records name these sculptors. History remembers their work, not their existence. Yet through their craft, their presence endures. The soldiers they built were not perfect, and that is why they still feel alive. Some have crooked noses, uneven ears, a faint scar across the cheek. Others bear the weight of unseen emotions. They were made not to look identical, but to look inevitable. Even in the afterlife, the emperor would be surrounded not by statues, but by souls. The eyes are the most haunting. They do not stare, they observe. They do not accuse, they endure. When the archaeologists first unearthed them, many reported the unsettling sense of being watched, as if the clay remembered. Perhaps it does. Clay, after all, holds fingerprints. Run a light across a soldier's cheek, and you can still see them faint ridges pressed by a hand that turned dust into eternity. Those fingerprints are the last traces of the unknown artists, hidden signatures embedded in the skin of empire. The soldiers stand shoulder to shoulder, but there is space between them, a silence wide enough for ghosts to pass through. Under the dim lights of the museum, the air feels almost sacred. Visitors whisper without meaning to, their voices swallowed by the vastness. Each statue rises to meet them, as if returning the gaze. The stillness is not lifeless, it hums with memory. 8,000 men, 8,000 lives, 8,000 quiet eternities. Some scholars believe the faces were modelled after real soldiers in Qin Shi Huang's armies, portraits of the living transposed into deathless clay. Others think the diversity was deliberate, meant to represent the unity of all under heaven. The emperor's dream of one people, one empire, embodied in many forms. Whatever the truth, the result is a paradox individuality in service of obedience. A single will commanding countless selves. In this contradiction lies the beauty of the Terracotta Army. It is not just art, it is psychology sculpted in earth. The soldier's armor is equally detailed. Plates overlap with mathematical precision, cords twist and fasten as if ready to move. Even the soles of their shoes bear patterns no one was meant to see. They were built for eternity, not for display perfection intended for the dark. That might be the most human touch of all, to create beauty for eyes that would never look upon it. And yet, there is melancholy in their perfection. They were made to guard a man who would never rise again, to stand forever in an empire that would soon crumble. Their purpose was to protect eternity, but eternity forgot them. They became prisoners of time, soldiers without war, faces without names. When we look at them now, we are not seeing warriors. We are seeing mirrors. Each one reflects the same fragile wish to be remembered. As the camera lingers on a single face, half cracked, half whole, the narrator's voice softens. Beneath the glaze, beneath the symmetry, lies something tender. These are not just relics. They are the faces of a vanished world, sculpted by hands that still echo through them. Every wrinkle, every imperfection is a whisper across time. I was here. I mattered. And so, 8,000 men stand eternal, not identical, but infinite. Their silence speaks louder than any inscription, their stillness heavier than any monument. They do not move, but they remind us that even in the service of empire, creation can outlast command. Soon, the story will turn to the question their existence demands: how such fragile humanity could be shaped from earth and fire, and how it has endured 2,000 years without turning to dust. Once, they were painted in living colour, an army that looked back at the sun. It is difficult to imagine now, standing before the ranks of silent earth, that every soldier was once radiant with life. Reds as deep as blood, blues drawn from crushed azurite, greens from malachite, violets mixed with rare minerals that caught the light like dew. They were not the grey, solemn figures we see today, but vibrant beings dressed in the hues of power and divinity. Beneath the torchlight of the afterlife, the Terracotta Army glowed like dawn breaking beneath the ground. The artisans who built them understood something profound, that colour was not decoration, but life itself. In their hands, pigments became breath. When they brushed crimson onto a warrior's lips or layered jade green across his armour, they were not painting clay, they were animating it. The soldiers' faces blushed with the warmth of flesh, their eyes shimmered with faint varnish, their hair shone with lacquered black. For the Emperor's eternity to feel real, it had to look alive. But colour, like memory, does not last forever. The moment air touched the figures after 2,000 years, the paint began to die. It cracked, curled, and flaked away within minutes, the last traces of that vivid army vanishing into dust. The archaeologists who uncovered them could only watch helplessly as the colours turned to whispers. Some tried to preserve them, sealing fragments in glass, photographing what they could before it disappeared. But the hues refused captivity. What remains now are ghosts of brightness, traces of purple near a collar, a faint rust red across a cheekbone, a soft gleam of blue hidden beneath an ear. The army has returned to the same earth tones from which it was born. And yet, in their fading, they have become something more eternal. The narrator's voice softens, almost reverent. In losing their colour, they gained their silence, and in silence, they found their immortality. The artistry behind these soldiers was as complex as the empire that built them. Each figure was formed in parts: head, torso, arms, and legs moulded separately, then joined together like the assembling of a living being. Inside, they were hollow, their cores strengthened by careful firing. Archaeologists believe the craftsmen used large updraft kilns, the same kind employed for pottery, but scaled to monumental size. The temperature had to be exact: a breath too hot, and the clay would crack; too cool, and it would crumble with time. Thousands of statues, each perfectly balanced between fire and fragility. Once fired, the artisans polished the surface with fine sand, smoothing the clay to resemble skin. They used brushes of animal hair to apply layers of lacquer, a luminous, resinous coating that would later hold the pigments in place. When dry, it shimmered faintly, reflecting torchlight like sweat on a living face. Over this, they painted with a precision that bordered on devotion. Every stroke was a prayer for permanence, every hue a tribute to the Emperor's dream of eternity. Imagine the scene: a dim workshop filled with firelight, the hum of craftsmen working in unison. A master sculptor leans close, inspecting the curve of a jaw, adjusting the angle of a brow. Nearby, apprentices grind minerals into pigment, their mortar stones echoing softly against the walls. The air smells of smoke, lacquer, and clay, the scent of creation. Outside, the empire stretches into darkness, unaware that within these walls, immortality is being shaped by hand. They worked in silence because the project demanded secrecy. What they built was not meant to be seen by the living. The Emperor's afterlife was a private universe, an empire beneath the empire. To speak of it was treason. And so, they poured their genius into the hidden world, into faces that would never see daylight. Their art was made for shadows, yet it endured beyond any sunlight. When we gaze upon the Terracotta Army today, stripped of its colour, we are seeing not a failure of preservation, but a transformation. The soldiers' muted tones are the patina of time, the proof that beauty, like memory, survives not in perfection but in endurance. Their silence carries a resonance brighter than pigment. Their stillness radiates the calm of ages. The faded armour and pale faces speak of the same truth that time tells all things, that glory fades, but meaning deepens. The colours that once shouted now whisper, and in that whisper is peace. Some restorers dream of returning them to their original hues through digital reconstruction to revive the army in all its lost brilliance. But perhaps the grey silence we see now is truer to their purpose. These are not warriors of the living world anymore. They belong to history's dusk, to the beauty of what endures when colour fades and sound falls quiet. Art, like memory, survives through loss. The Emperor sought eternity through command. His artisans achieved it through imperfection. Their craft, though nameless, has outlived dynasties, wars, and beliefs. They turned clay into continuity, matter into meaning. As the camera moves across the soldiers once more, the narrator reflects. The colours are gone, but the fire remains, not the one that baked their bodies, but the one that still glows in their silence. The Terracotta Army, stripped of its brilliance, stands as the purest form of art, the art of endurance. Every crack, every faded mark, is not decay but testimony. In the language of eternity, fragility is truth. And as the light fades across the pit, the soldiers return to their element, quiet, uncoloured, unbroken. They are what all art becomes when time has done its work, memory itself. Soon, the story will turn from how they were made to why, to the deeper question that still haunts the silence between them. What was this army truly guarding, and what dream was it built to protect? He built an army not to fight death, but to greet it. For all his conquests, Qin Shi Huang feared only one enemy, the silence that follows the final breath. In life, he had commanded hundreds of thousands. In death, he would command forever. The Terracotta Army was his answer to the oldest question of all. What happens when the emperor closes his eyes? Ancient China believed that the world of the living and the world of the dead mirrored each other, reflections divided by a veil, not a wall. To rule one, you must prepare for the other. In that belief lay both logic and longing. The afterlife was not a place of rest, but of continuation. The same duties, honours, and dangers followed the soul beyond the grave. Just as a king would need food, servants, and protection in life, so too would his spirit require them in eternity. To die unguarded was to face chaos. To enter death with order was to remain sovereign. And so, the emperor dreamed of immortality not through spirit, but through structure. His empire had united the living world. His tomb would unite the next. Beneath the fields of Xi'an, he built a mirror kingdom, rivers of mercury for water, constellations inlaid above his coffin, and armies lined for defense. Every corridor, every passage, was part of a grand cosmic symmetry, meant to preserve balance between heaven and earth. In the emperor's mind, eternity was not a mystery, it was a system. The soldiers were more than guards. They were symbols, embodiments of stability, of order against the unknown. In their ranks, the emperor saw assurance that the world he had built would not unravel when he departed. Each warrior stood as a seal against chaos, a promise that structure could outlast flesh. His obsession with control became a theology, his architecture a scripture of command. Where others sought comfort in gods, he sought it in design. But beneath this logic was fear. Qin Shi Huang, though called the Son of Heaven, was haunted by mortality. He sent expeditions in search of elixirs of life, swallowed mercury believing it divine, consulted magicians who spoke of islands where death could not reach. Yet, for all his efforts, his search ended not in eternity, but in a tomb. Perhaps he knew, as all do in the end, that no wall is high enough, no army large enough, to guard against time. Still, he tried, and in trying, he left behind something stranger than immortality, a monument to the human refusal to vanish quietly. The Terracotta Army was meant to protect, but also to reflect. Look long enough, and its ranks resemble the empire itself, vast, ordered, individual, yet unified. The same hands that tilled the soil built these figures. The same faces that once bowed before the emperor are immortalized in clay. They are not just soldiers. They are citizens of a frozen nation, conscripted into eternity. Through them, Qin Shi Huang's dream of eternal rule was fulfilled, though not as he intended. The emperor's body has vanished, but his people remain, silent and unbroken. And within that silence lies a lesson, one that humbles every age. The soldiers do not march, they do not speak, yet they endure. They were built to obey a master who no longer exists, but in their endurance, they have outlasted his command. Power fades, but creation remains. The emperor's fear gave birth to something greater than his rule art that remembers what authority forgets, that all things built for control will someday belong to wonder. The philosopher Zhuangzi once wrote, "The great man does not seek to conquer the world, for he knows it cannot be held." Perhaps the artisans who sculpted these warriors understood this better than the emperor himself. In the stillness of their work, they were not making soldiers. They were shaping time, giving form to the space between life and death, fear and beauty. As the narrator's voice lowers, the camera lingers on the endless rows of faces, each tilted toward the same unseen horizon. Together, they form a kind of prayer, not for victory, but for remembrance. They are the emperor's final question, echoing through centuries. If one can command eternity, is it truly eternal? The Terracotta Army answers in silence. Their existence does not conquer death, it converses with it. Each figure is both defiance and surrender, a gesture of control carved into clay, left to crumble under the same sky it was made to protect. When we look upon them today, we see more than the dream of one man. We see the oldest human wish that something of us might remain. The emperor built an army to preserve his name. The artisans built it to preserve meaning. Between them lies the truth of all creation. We build because we know we will be gone. As the light fades and the camera drifts away, the rows dissolve into darkness, an empire sinking once more into sleep. Above the buried soldiers, the wind moves softly through the grass, whispering the question that will carry the story forward. What happens when even the eternal begins to decay? Even the builders of eternity must rest. The story of Qin Shi Huang's end does not arrive with thunder or glory, but with the quiet inevitability of a setting sun. After years spent chasing immortality, the man who feared death most met it alone on a journey to find its cure. He had left the capital in secret, travelling east in search of the fabled Isles of the Immortals, where alchemists promised a potion that could make him divine. His court whispered of mercury elixirs, of strange metals and powders ground from stars, of servants who vanished into the sea and never returned. Somewhere between mountains and coastline, the emperor's body began to fail. The same substance he believed would preserve him was quietly unmaking him from within. The night he died, there was no witness of ceremony, no final proclamation. The man who had commanded a continent simply stopped breathing, his heart still under the weight of ambition. The attendants who found him panicked, not from grief, but from fear. To announce his death would invite chaos. The empire he built had never learned to exist without his shadow. And so, they carried his corpse in silence, sealing the smell with carts of fish, pretending he still lived as they travelled west toward the capital. The sun burned above them, the flies gathered. Behind their masks of loyalty, the empire began to unravel. In the capital, officials continued to stamp decrees in his name, soldiers bowed to his empty throne, and scribes recorded his imagined words. The great dream of eternity lasted a few more weeks on paper, before dissolving into rumour. By the time his body reached Xi'an, the illusion had decayed beyond repair. What was once the heart of the world now pulsed with uncertainty. Power, once absolute, had lost its breath. They say his burial took place beneath the full moon, a ceremony of shadows and whispers. The emperor's coffin, cast in bronze and sealed with mercury, was lowered into the centre of his vast underground city. Around him lay treasures and artifacts meant to serve him in the next realm. Jade armour, golden birds, miniature palaces, rivers that gleamed with liquid metal. The Terracotta Army stood above, eternal sentinels awaiting orders that would never come. The tunnels were closed, the entrances collapsed, the world above resumed its seasons, but beneath it, time stopped. Within months, rebellion tore through the empire. The Qin dynasty, meant to last 10,000 generations, survived barely 15 years. Peasants rose, generals defected, provinces declared independence. The weight of conquest had been too heavy for a single lifetime to bear. The same walls that unified China now fractured into silence. The emperor's name, once spoken with awe, became a warning whispered by poets, that power without mercy builds monuments but no memory. And so, the dream of immortality turned to dust. The empire that was meant to outlive time could not outlive the man who imagined it. History, in its strange mercy, left behind his shadow, instead, an empire beneath the soil, where soldiers still stand in the posture of obedience. Above them, the living world forgot. The tomb was sealed so well that even its location faded from memory. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, and the fields above grew wheat, then silence. In the end, Qin Shi Huang's greatest success was his own disappearance. His design for eternity worked too well. He had wanted a world where death could not reach him, and in a sense, it never did. His army sleeps, his city endures, and yet his name drifts through history like a myth half-remembered. The man who unified China became a ghost within it. The paradox is almost poetic. He conquered the living, but was defeated by time. The narrator's voice softens. The emperor dreamed of endless light, but in the end, eternity required darkness. Above the buried world, the seasons continued rain, softening the soil, roots threading through the forgotten vaults. The same earth that once yielded armies now held its creator in silence. The great empire had returned to dust, as all empires must. And yet, in that stillness, something endured. The emperor's city beneath the ground did not vanish. It simply waited. The terracotta soldiers stood unmoving, preserving his final command in the language of stillness. Their patience became their purpose. In a world that forgot him, they remembered. He sought eternity and was forgotten within a generation. But history, in its circular mercy, never loses what it hides. The world above might have moved on, but beneath its roots, the first emperor's dream continued to hum, quiet and complete. As the story fades, the camera rises from the tomb into the pale dawn of centuries. Dynasties will rise, wars will burn, faiths will shift, but deep below, the emperor's breath lingers in the still air of his buried world. And in that silence begins the next chapter, the long sleep of history, where memory dissolves and myth begins to dream again. Empires vanished, the soldiers did not. Long after Qin Shi Huang's dynasty had turned to dust, the earth above his buried army continued to breathe, slow, patient, eternal. The tombs of kings crumble, the banners of conquest fade, yet beneath the soil of Xi'an, thousands of clay faces remained untouched, locked in formation beneath centuries of storms. Time, which devours everything, became their quiet guardian. Seasons came and went like dreams. Spring rain softened the earth, washing down the slopes of forgotten hills. Summer thunder rolled across the plain, shaking the surface but never stirring what lay beneath. Autumns scattered golden leaves over the fields, while winters sealed them beneath frost. The farmers above ploughed, planted, harvested, unaware that their tools grazed the roof of a kingdom below. Beneath every footprint, a soldier waited. Beneath every seed, history slept. For more than 2,000 years, the Terracotta Army endured without witness. Dynasties rose and fell in cycles as steady as the moon. The Han came, reverent yet wary of their predecessors' ghosts. The Tang brought poetry and silk, unaware that beneath their shining capital, another empire rested in silence. Mongol horses thundered across China. Ming palaces glittered and burned. Foreign traders crossed deserts with maps that named every city except the one below their feet. Through it all, the soldiers stood unbroken. Their faces, sealed in clay and darkness, watched the slow erosion of time without seeing it. Roots grew around their armor. Earthworms tunneled between their boots. Water seeped into cracks, carrying the scent of the surface: rain, soil, smoke, life. Even decay became gentle underground. The air was still, the temperature constant. The silence was complete. No fire reached them. No hand disturbed their ranks. The army became a kind of mineral prayer, a fusion of human intent and geological patience. Above them, history rewrote itself again and again. Philosophers debated the nature of heaven and empire. Poets sang of lost dynasties. Scholars copied texts that no longer remembered the first emperor by name. The centuries smoothed his image, softened his cruelty, turned his tomb into rumor. Some said it lay under a mountain of bronze. Others said it was cursed, or swallowed by the river that flowed beside his city. Travellers told of strange mists that rose from the fields after rain, the breath of buried spirits, perhaps. The locals grew used to them. Every mystery becomes ordinary when it lingers long enough. And so, time performed its quiet miracle. It did not destroy, it transformed. The soldiers, once vibrant with painted life, became the colour of the soil that covered them. The pigments faded, the lacquer dissolved, but their forms endured. What had been art became artifact. What had been devotion became legend. The emperor's dream of eternity, born from fear, found fulfillment in stillness. Imagine the world passing overhead, the invention of paper, of printing, of gunpowder and compass. Imagine the birth of empires far beyond China's borders. Rome rising and falling, continents discovered, oceans crossed, machines roaring to life while below it all, an army slept on, unaltered. For every century of human noise, there was an equal measure of underground silence. The balance was perfect. The narrator's voice softens. Beneath the turning of history, beneath the noise of human ambition, there exists another rhythm, slower, deeper, older. Archaeologists call this the long sleep of history, when time no longer buries the past in cruelty, but cradles it in preservation. Clay is patient. It remembers without distortion. While palaces crumbled and libraries burned, The terracotta soldiers endured as the purest memory of their age, untouched, uncorrupted, waiting for the world to remember them again. There were moments when chance brushed close. During the Ming dynasty, farmers unearthed fragments of strange pottery and assumed they were idols, burying them again out of superstition. In later centuries, imperial surveyors recorded odd mounds and hollows near Lintong, but the empire was too vast, its concerns too immediate. The whispers of the buried army remained faint, a secret waiting for the right kind of silence to be broken. The centuries continued to turn, carrying wars, revolutions, and reform. The soil deepened, the horizon filled with modern towns. Electric lines were strung over the very fields that hid the ancient ones. Each generation lived its story unaware that another, far older one, was unfolding in the dark beneath them. The Emperor's architects had achieved their goal, to make eternity invisible. And yet, nothing hidden stays hidden forever. The same earth that guards also reveals. Erosion shifts, roots pull, rains carve through layers, and time, so patient in its keeping, eventually exhales. The past begins to breathe again. As night falls in the story, the narrator's voice becomes softer still, like a lullaby woven from centuries. They were made to serve forever, and forever they served without witness, without sound. The imagery slows the camera gliding through layers of soil, past forgotten seeds, bones, and roots, until faint shapes emerge in the dark. A hand moulded in clay, a face frozen in calm vigilance, a helmet that has not seen light since before Christ walked the earth. The stillness feels holy, not absence, but presence. Above, the modern world hums cars on distant roads, neon signs flickering, the chatter of life unknowing. Below, in the quiet, the soldiers remain as they have always been, guardians of a dream that once tried to defeat death and by accident transcended it. For 2,000 years, time itself became their emperor. It gave them decay, but also endurance. It erased their colour but preserved their form. It buried them in darkness, only to prepare them for rediscovery. The world changed its gods, its languages, its borders, but the clay soldiers never changed. They are the one unbroken sentence in the book of forgetting. And now, the story begins to shift, the soil loosening, the air stirring. After 20 centuries of silence, the earth is ready to speak again. The camera lingers one last time in the darkness before a single spark of sunlight filters down through the cracks. Somewhere above, in a small village, a farmer lifts his shovel. Even buried truth finds a voice. Long before the archaeologists came with brushes and maps, the land itself had been speaking softly in the language of rumour. The farmers of Shaanxi knew their fields were restless. Sometimes, after rain, the earth would sweat a strange metallic sheen. Sometimes, their ploughs struck something that rang instead of thudded the hollow chime of history beneath the roots. They told each other stories to make sense of it. That's what people do when the ground remembers more than they do. The elders said the plain was haunted. They warned children not to dig too deep, that ghosts guarded what was below. On windless nights, they swore they heard faint echoes, not screams, but the slow shifting of men who had forgotten how to die. The tales drifted from one generation to another like pollen, that the Emperor's army still stood underground, bound by spells, their eyes turned upward, waiting for a signal that never came. Some said that if you pressed your ear to the soil, you could hear their armour rustling in the dark. Others said the earth itself was alive, breathing through the clay, remembering the footsteps of those who made it. No one believed completely, yet no one disbelieved. In villages like these, the boundary between superstition and history has always been thin, a membrane of reverence stretched across centuries. The soil was more than ground. It was inheritance, the skin of the ancestors. To disturb it without reason felt wrong, as though one might wake something best left dreaming. And so, the fields were ploughed gently, superstitiously, with pauses and small prayers, a quiet acknowledgement that the past was still listening. In every season, the earth gave its small reminders. A shard of pottery, a sculpted hand, mistaken for a broken idol, a fragment of terracotta so fine it seemed almost alive. They would wash it, turn it over in their calloused palms, and bury it again. Some pieces were placed on home altars, offerings to restless spirits. Others were returned to the fields at dusk, with murmured apologies. What had been made for eternity had become folklore. The archaeology of the subconscious passed through story rather than science. The narrator's voice lowers, as though recounting a dream. The soldiers beneath the soil had been forgotten by kings, but not by the earth. And through the mouths of farmers, they spoke again. Generations lived and died with those whispers. The world outside changed beyond recognition. Empires collapsed, revolutions flared, cities rose. But in the villages, memory endured in its softest form, rumour. A kind of knowing without evidence, belief without proof. Perhaps that is the truest kind of remembrance, for it asks nothing but wonder. Children grew up hearing the stories by lamplight, tales of armoured spirits and hidden palaces, of a sleeping emperor who would one day rise to reclaim his throne. They would listen wide-eyed, half frightened, half comforted, imagining the clay soldiers beneath them standing shoulder to shoulder, protecting the village through storms and seasons. In their dreams, the ground was not dead, it was sacred. Sometimes, the legends took on new shapes. During wars, when soldiers marched through Xi'an again, people whispered that they were echoes of the old army, reawakened by the thunder of guns. When the droughts came, elders said it was the emperor's curse, the buried spirits thirsting beneath dry soil. When the harvests were good, they gave thanks to the watchers underground. In this way, the Terracotta Army remained alive, not as artifact but as presence. The clay faces, unseen for millennia, lived on in story. Each retelling smoothed the details, softened the edges, until the past became poetry. And still, the soil kept its silence, guarding what words could not. Every legend, every superstition, was a kind of excavation not of objects, but of awe. Even in the modern age, when machines replaced oxen and the world's noise reached the quiet provinces, the whispers persisted. Radios crackled with new voices, but the old ones did not fade. It is the nature of deep memory to adapt, not to die. The earth remembers in layers, myth first, history later. And so, the people of Shaanxi lived above an empire of ghosts, their lives braided with its breath. They did not know that beneath their feet, entire armies waited in perfect stillness. But perhaps they sensed it. Perhaps, in the long pauses between thunder and rain, they felt the weight of unseen eyes. The narrator's voice drifts into the hush of night. Every story told in the dark is an act of faith that someone, somewhere, is listening. By the time modern discovery approached that day in 1974, when farmers digging a well struck a buried face, the stories had already prepared the ground. The earth had been whispering for centuries. Humanity had only just learned to hear again. The field was never empty. It only waited for the right hands to dig, and the right moment for silence to break. And now, as the story rises gently from myth to memory, the camera turns from the past toward the present, where what was once called superstition will soon be called history. To touch the past is to change it. When the first archaeologists arrived at the fields of Lintong, they did not come as conquerors but as confessors, pilgrims approaching an altar they barely understood. The air itself seemed reluctant to be disturbed. Beneath their boots, the ground had been sleeping for 2,000 years, holding its breath through dynasties and storms. To dig was not simply an act of science, it was an act of trespass and devotion. The discovery of the Terracotta Army in 1974 had already rewritten what the world thought possible. But the work that followed demanded something quieter than glory. Archaeologists moved like monks through the trenches, their brushes tracing not just lines of clay but the outline of an entire forgotten world. Every motion was a negotiation with time, how much to reveal and how much to leave untouched. The warriors emerged one by one, their faces pale beneath the light, expressions frozen not in battle but in waiting. The scientists called it excavation. The locals called it awakening. Both were right. As the pits expanded, so too did the sense of unease. Each unearthed soldier carried with it the weight of an ancient wish, eternity undisturbed. The emperor had built his tomb to last forever, sealed with mercury and curses, guarded by secrecy. To open even a corner of it felt like breaking a spell. Some of the older workers refused to look into the soldiers' eyes, whispering that their gaze could follow you home. Others left small offerings, incense, coins, folded paper gestures of apology for the intrusion. Even the most rational among them admitted to feeling watched. In the early days, excavation was an act of faith performed by hand. The scientists kneeled in the dust, documenting every fragment, every shard, every detail of color still clinging to the clay. They soon realized that time was not the only force they were fighting. It was air itself. The moment a statue was exposed to oxygen, the ancient pigments began to fade and flake away. Colors that had survived 2 millennia vanished within minutes of discovery. It was as if the past could not survive direct light. The soldiers had waited in the dark for centuries. Perhaps they wished to remain there. This became the quiet dilemma that haunted every archaeologist in Xi'an. To preserve, they must destroy. To reveal, they must risk erasure. Each layer of soil they lifted was a decision between reverence and curiosity. How much of the unseen world should we allow to see the sun? How many secrets can truth afford to keep? The dig became a kind of prayer, careful, deliberate, filled with pauses. The narrator's voice lowers. In archaeology, as in memory, discovery is never neutral. The moment we uncover something, we alter what it means. Even the machinery of excavation seemed to obey a sacred rhythm. The clatter of shovels was muted by the soft brush of bristles. The hum of cameras replaced the chant of scribes. The site became a modern monastery, scholars in gloves and masks working by lamplight, surrounded by rows of statues that looked almost alive. Some nights, when the wind blew through the open pits, it sounded like distant breathing. The archaeologists joked quietly about it, though none laughed for long. For many, the experience felt less like science and more like communion. Each artifact was a message from the dead, not loud, but persistent. Pottery fragments whispered of hands that once shaped them. Tools bore fingerprints still visible beneath centuries of dust. The soldiers themselves, though silent, seemed to contain entire biographies. Some had cracks across their lips, as if mid-speech. Others bore faint impressions of cloth or armor straps long decayed. Every detail became evidence of humanity, not myth, not monument, but life. The deeper they dug, the stronger the paradox grew. The Emperor had sought immortality through creation, and in unearthing his dream, modern hands had granted it. The clay army, meant to stand unseen for eternity, now stood beneath glass and spotlight, studied by millions. Their silence had become spectacle, and the archaeologists, aware of this irony, carried it like a quiet burden. Were they rescuing the past or disturbing its peace? Each discovery deepened the question. A bronze chariot, so delicate it shattered upon touch. An archer whose colours still shimmered faintly beneath the dust. A single clay hand holding an invisible weapon, the symbol of an empire's reach, now empty. These fragments spoke not of conquest, but of care. Whoever made them had poured into their craft a kind of reverence that transcended centuries. To break that stillness felt like betrayal, yet to ignore it felt worse. Outside the site, the world began to take notice. The Terracotta Army became a symbol of China's heritage, of human ingenuity, of eternity itself. But within the trenches, where the air smelled of earth and stone, the tone remained hushed. The archaeologists continued their work like caretakers of a fragile dream. Some described feeling as though the soldiers were watching over them, guiding their hands. Others wrote in their journals of a strange peace that descended when they stood alone among the statues, as if the dead were grateful to be seen again. And yet, reverence alone could not shield the truth from paradox. Every act of remembrance risks distortion. Every resurrection requires a death. As the dig expanded and museums were planned, some questioned whether the soldiers should have remained untouched, whether the beauty of secrecy had been more powerful than revelation. In that debate, archaeology revealed its truest face, not as a science of things, but as a meditation on time. To dig into the earth is to dig into ourselves, to confront the impermanence we spend our lives denying. The soldiers were never just artifacts, they were mirrors. In their stillness, we see our own desire to be remembered, our own fear of fading. As night falls over the excavation site, the camera pans outward. The floodlights dim, leaving only silhouettes, rows of faces staring into darkness once more. The narrator's final words hover in the still air. The earth keeps secrets not to hide them, but to remind us that truth, like life, is fragile. The scene fades to quiet. The soil, now open, seems to hum again, not with resistance, but with acceptance. What was once buried has been touched, and in that touch, changed forever. And far beyond the trenches, the whisper spreads through headlines. across oceans, through the collective dream of the modern world, as humanity begins to awaken to the beauty of what it nearly forgot. The empire he built fell. The memory he buried returned. When the Terracotta Army stepped once more into the light, it did not just rewrite history, it redefined how a nation saw itself. What had lain silent beneath the farmlands of Shaanxi was not merely an archaeological treasure, but a reflection of China's enduring soul. In the still faces of clay, the country glimpsed its own, weathered by centuries, fractured by struggle, yet unbroken beneath the weight of time. For millennia, China had been a civilization of layers, dynasties rising and fading like breaths, each claiming to begin anew. But the soldiers unearthed in 1974 told a different story, not of beginnings, but of continuities. They stood as proof that the thread had never been severed, that even through revolutions and ruptures, something ancient had endured in the heart of the nation. The past was no longer distant, it was tangible, textured, present beneath the fingertips of those who brushed dust from its eyes. In the early days after the discovery, China was still emerging from decades of turmoil, a society searching for equilibrium after years of cultural upheaval. The unearthing of Qin Shi Huang's army offered more than wonder. It offered coherence. Here was unity carved in clay, an empire frozen in harmony. The emperor who once ruled through fear now served a gentler purpose, to remind his descendants of their shared inheritance. The same soil that had buried the army now gave birth to a new symbol of national pride. The narrator's voice softens. Sometimes the future is built not by what we invent, but by what we remember. The soldiers became a mirror, not of tyranny, but of endurance. For a people long told to forget, they offered permission to remember. In every face unearthed, there was a hint of China's countless identities. The warrior, the craftsman, the farmer, the dreamer. Together, they formed a chorus of silence, a monument not to conquest, but to continuity. Scholars began to see the Terracotta Army as more than an artifact of empire. It became a symbol of the Chinese psyche itself, collective, disciplined, resilient, yet filled with individual humanity. No two soldiers were alike, just as no two citizens are, and yet all stood in perfect formation. It was unity without uniformity, strength through diversity, order shaped by devotion. The army reflected the same paradox that has always defined China, the harmony of the many serving the vision of the one. In schools, teachers spoke of the warriors as proof of ancient brilliance. In museums, visitors walked through the glass-lit pits with quiet awe, as though visiting ancestors. The government recognized the power of what had been found and declared the site a national treasure, a heritage of the entire world. For the first time, China's ancient history was not just something to be studied, it was something to be felt. The soldiers, once meant to defend one man's immortality, now guarded the legacy of a billion. Their silence became a conversation between past and present, between pride and humility. It reminded China that its greatness was not merely an invention or conquest, but an endurance in the way its story survived through art, ritual, and memory, even when buried beneath centuries of change. Outside Xi'an, new roads were built to bring pilgrims of curiosity. Farmers who once tended wheat now watched buses of visitors arrive from every corner of the world. The terracotta warriors became ambassadors, their stoic faces speaking a universal language, that civilization endures not through domination, but through remembrance. The irony was gentle but profound. Qin Shi Huang had sought to make himself eternal through control walls, armies, monuments, yet it was not his power that lasted, but the art that expressed it. His empire vanished, his dream remained. Through the rediscovery of his clay soldiers, China found not his immortality, but its own. The narrator lingers on a quiet image, dust motes floating in the sunlight of the excavation hall, glimmering like small galaxies. Each speck of earth carries memory, the voice murmurs. Each statue holds the breath of a craftsman whose name we will never know. The discovery also changed how the world saw China not as a land emerging from isolation, but as one returning from silence. It reminded the modern age that beneath technology and reform lay something timeless, a continuity of spirit that no revolution could erase. The Terracotta Army became proof that China's story did not begin in the 20th century, or even the first. It had always been there, quietly sculpting itself through centuries of resilience. In a nation often torn between remembering and reinventing, The army offered reconciliation. It allowed people to look backward without shame, to see strength not in conquest but in creation. And in that mirror of clay, China recognized both its fragility and its grace, a civilization capable of being buried and reborn without losing its essence. As the section draws to its close, the camera moves outward once again, from the still faces of the soldiers to the faces of visitors watching them. The past and present reflect each other in silent understanding. The narrator's final whisper, "The Emperor's empire did not survive, but the memory he buried returned not as power, but as peace." And from that peace, the story widens beyond China's borders, toward the waiting world where the terracotta soldiers will soon step beyond their homeland, carrying their silence across oceans, reminding distant eyes that even the oldest dreams can be rediscovered. The living now guard the dead. Every year, millions make the quiet pilgrimage to Xi'an not as tourists, but as witnesses. They come from every corner of the world, stepping softly into the vast hangars where the Terracotta Army stands beneath pale light. The sound that greets them is not chatter, but stillness, the collective hush of people confronting something older than belief. Phones rise, cameras click, but even the modern impulse to document feels subdued here, as though the air itself asks for reverence. The first sight is always the same, and yet never ordinary. Rows upon rows of warriors stretching into the dim distance, each one distinct, each one gazing forward, as if still waiting for a command that will never come. The visitors stand at the railing, faces illuminated by the muted glow. They whisper, then fall silent. Some lean forward unconsciously, trying to meet the eyes of a statue. Others simply breathe slower, as if afraid to disturb the dust that has been sleeping for 2,000 years. The narrator's voice moves like a whisper through the hall. The Emperor once built this army to protect him in death. Now, the living protect it from forgetting. Every museum has its artifacts, but few hold presence. The terracotta warriors are not exhibits, they are inhabitants. The air around them feels alive with memory. Guards watch over the pits not just for security, but almost as ritual custodians, keeping the boundary between the world of the living and the stillness of the past intact. Even the echo of footsteps fades quickly here, absorbed by the clay and the weight of centuries. The visitors become part of the scene. A child tugs at their parent's sleeve, asking why the soldiers don't move. An old man bows slightly, his gesture blending superstition with respect. Couples hold hands as if grounding themselves in something timeless. Each gaze adds a layer to the energy of the place. Curiosity, awe, reverence, until the room feels charged, humming with quiet devotion. The soldiers do not see them, yet in some way, they are seen. Around the site, life continues in soft harmony with history. Outside, vendors sell small clay replicas, their hands shaping the same gestures as the artisans who once molded the originals. Tour guides speak in hushed tones, their rehearsed facts sounding like prayers. The farmers who first uncovered the army sit at small wooden tables, signing autographs, living bridges between accident and eternity. Everything here seems touched by the paradox of preservation, the ordinary orbiting the immortal. The narrator continues, "When humanity meets its own reflection in stone, time folds in on itself." Some visitors cry without knowing why. Others linger long after the tour ends, unwilling to break the spell. It is not grief they feel, nor fear, but a tenderness too deep for language. The awareness that they are standing inside the breath of history. To look upon the soldiers is to feel the weight of human hands across centuries. To recognize that what we call the past is not gone at all. It is simply patient. The silence inside the hall has a rhythm. Cameras click like raindrops. Murmurs rise and fall like wind through grass. Somewhere, a single sigh echoes. In that stillness, strangers from across continents find themselves united, not by culture or creed, but by wonder. The Terracotta Army does not ask for belief. It only invites awe. Each visitor carries something away, not a souvenir, but a shift in perception. They walk back into the light of the modern world, feeling subtly altered, as though the clay soldiers have pressed something invisible into their memory. Perhaps it is humility. Perhaps gratitude. The recognition that time, though relentless, can also be kind. At night, when the crowds have gone and the lights dim, the soldiers stand in their silent ranks once more. The air cools. The echo of footsteps fades completely. Dust settles gently on the rails. And yet, something remains, an afterglow of reverence, left behind by millions of unseen hearts. It lingers like incense in a temple long after prayer has ended. Even the caretakers, sweeping the floors, speak softly among themselves. They know the site breathes differently once the doors are closed. The statues seem to exhale, the silence thickening like mist. Some claim to hear faint sounds, a creak, a sigh, the rustle of imagined armor. Whether real or not, no one doubts that the place remembers. This is what makes the Terracotta Army more than an archaeological wonder. It is a living ritual. Each person who visits participates in its continuation, adding breath to a story that never truly ended. The soldiers guard their emperor still, but in another way, it is the living who now guard them. Every look of awe, every pause of silence, becomes a gesture of protection, ensuring that the past remains whole, not as relic but as presence. The narrator's voice drifts like a lullaby. When we look at them, we are not remembering the dead, we are remembering ourselves. And so, the Pilgrims of Wonder return to their homes across the world, carrying fragments of that stillness with them, the image of silent warriors standing unblinking beneath an endless roof, the feeling that somewhere, beneath all our modern noise, the earth is still whispering. What began as discovery has become devotion. The terracotta soldiers no longer guard a tomb. They guard a truth that humanity's deepest longing is not to conquer time, but to be remembered gently by it. And with that understanding, the story begins to turn inward, away from the excavation and spectacle, toward reflection itself. What does this silent army teach us about eternity? About fear? About the fragile art of remembrance? The answers, like the soldiers, wait quietly beneath the surface. We still build empires of data hoping they'll outlast us. The desire that once drove emperors to raise tombs and armies has not vanished. It has only changed shape. The tools are different now. Glass screens instead of bronze. Servers instead of temples. But the hunger is the same. Beneath the gleaming surface of modern life lies the same quiet fear that haunted Qin Shi Huang, the dread of vanishing. Humanity has always feared the silence that follows its last breath, and every civilization has built monuments to keep it away. Some carved mountains, others built cathedrals. We build memories that never die, stored in machines that never sleep. The narrator's tone softens reflective, almost tender. Immortality was never about living forever. It was about being remembered long enough to be believed. The Emperor of China sought eternity in clay, commanding thousands to shape his likeness through the hands of others. Today, the same instinct animates the world in subtler ways. We record, archive, upload, preserve, as if the act of documentation could ward off disappearance. Our lives unfold in fragments, photos, posts, voices, traces of thought. Each moment captured becomes an offering to the digital tomb we've built for ourselves. The pyramids of the past rise now as clouds of data, vast, silent, and endless, floating above us like invisible mausoleums. But as in every age, the price of forever is weight. What begins as preservation becomes obsession. Qin Shi Huang spent his final years consumed by the search for elixirs of life, drinking mercury and sealing himself from the very world he had conquered. In the glow of our screens, we follow the same path, not in palaces, but in pixels. We scroll endlessly, searching for permanence in images that vanish with a tap. Each post, each memory, is a prayer whispered to the algorithms we've made our new gods. Remember me, keep me, make me last. Yet, as the Emperor discovered, eternity is not peace, it is paralysis. To live forever, even in memory, is to never truly rest. His army of clay stands in silence because it cannot move. Our archives swell because they cannot forget. The digital afterlife we are building grows heavier each day, filled with echoes of lives we no longer live. The files outlast the people. The images remain after the faces fade. Somewhere, a server hums in a cold room, preserving laughter, sorrow, and the illusion of permanence. The camera glides across the statues, faces that were meant to be eternal, and then fades into reflections on glass screens glowing in the night. We have learned to preserve everything, the narrator murmurs, except the meaning of what we preserve. In every century, humanity pays the same price for its refusal to let go. The ancient emperor poured rivers of mercury to simulate the cosmos beneath his tomb, believing it would mirror the heavens and sustain his spirit. In doing so, he poisoned the earth that held him. Today, our endless data flows electric, invisible flood the world in another way. We drown in our own creation, unable to distinguish preservation from possession. Perhaps immortality was never meant to be achieved, only imagined. The dream of forever gives shape to our briefness, makes meaning possible. Without it, our days would scatter like dust. The Emperor's mistake was not his dream, but his certainty, the belief that eternity could be engineered. In that sense, his army is both triumph and warning, a monument to ambition and a mirror of its futility. And still, we cannot stop. We digitize our histories, scan our faces, record our voices, all in the hope that something of us will endure when the body fails. Scientists speak now of consciousness uploaded, of human memory preserved as code. It is a new kind of necropolis, one built not beneath the earth but within its circuits, replacing sarcophagi, archives replacing afterlives. The voice remains, but the soul, like the Emperor's, is nowhere to be found. The narrator's tone grows quieter, almost a whisper. What if the price of eternity is forgetting how to live? In our attempt to resist time, we surrender to it. The Emperor sealed himself from decay and became a legend of death. We seal our moments in servers and become ghosts of our own making, always present, never alive. The quest for immortality, whether carved in clay or coded in light, is not a rebellion against death but an avoidance of acceptance. And yet, within that struggle lies something deeply human, the refusal to let beauty vanish, the yearning to be known beyond our smallness. Perhaps that is why the terracotta soldiers still move us. They are the Emperor's fear turned into art, his obsession made visible. What he built to defy death now teaches us how to live with reverence for what passes, and humility for what remains. His army stands as both warning and gift. Eternity is not found in conquest, but in creation. What endures is not power, but craftsmanship, not the hand that commands, but the one that shapes. The narrator pauses, letting silence breathe between words. Every age builds its monument, they say. Some crumble, others evolve, but all whisper the same confession: we are afraid to be forgotten. And yet, to be forgotten may be a kind of grace. The Emperor sought permanence and found stillness. We chase preservation and find exhaustion. Perhaps the truer immortality lies not in resisting time, but in joining its rhythm, leaving behind not walls or files, but moments of beauty that dissolve gently into memory. The Terracotta Army, in its patient stillness, teaches us that endurance need not be eternal to be meaningful. Even clay, once shaped, can speak across millennia not because it resists decay, but because it embraces it. The faded pigments, the cracks, the missing weapons, all are signs of time's touch, not its defeat. As the section draws to its close, the camera pans over the sleeping ranks one last time. The light shifts from bronze to gold, like the last hour before dusk. The narrator's voice fades to a murmur. We still build empires of forever, but perhaps the truest legacy is not what survives, but what inspires. The music softens. The army disappears into shadow. And as the scene quiets, the story turns toward art, the other kind of immortality. Not the one carved for kings, but the one created by hands that know they will vanish and work anyway. Every statue was an ancient backup of a soul. When we look at the terracotta soldiers today, standing silent beneath their restored roof of steel and glass, we are not simply seeing art or archaeology. We are staring into an ancient attempt at digital immortality, a simulation of life before the word technology even existed. Each warrior was a data point in clay, a coded likeness meant to preserve identity beyond death. The Emperor, in his vast loneliness, had ordered not mere statues but a system, a living archive of himself and his world. In their ranks we can still feel that strange, prophetic intent, the desire to replicate existence so completely that it will never fade. Faces were sculpted from memory, gestures frozen like lines of script. In a sense, the craftsmen of the Qin dynasty were early programmers. They did not work with machines, but with symbols encoding emotion, hierarchy, and individuality into form. Each line carved into clay was an instruction, a fragment of life transferred from flesh to permanence. The narrator's tone is soft and reflective. They copied the world they knew, pixel by pixel, only their pixels were particles of earth. 2,000 years later, we have returned to the same impulse, though our tools have changed. The emperors of today are not carved in clay, but coded in data, their likenesses preserved in photographs, their voices uploaded to the cloud, their desires tracked and translated into algorithms. The human wish to endure has not evolved, it has merely digitized. What once required thousands of sculptors now happens in an instant. A scan, a save, an upload. The same faith endures beneath the surface, that replication equals remembrance. Yet the similarity carries its shadow. The Terracotta Army, for all its beauty, was lifeless, perfectly detailed, eternally unmoving. Each soldier stood complete, but empty the body remembered, the breath forgotten. Our own digital doubles share the same fate. We pour ourselves into profiles, messages, and archives, building vast armies of replicas, fragments that look like us, speak like us, think like us, but are not us. They march across servers and screens, preserving everything except the warmth of being alive. The camera drifts between the clay faces and the glow of modern screens. The soldiers' eyes seem to mirror the digital icons we scroll past every day, countless, similar, individual yet indistinguishable. In every age, the narrator murmurs, we mistake reflection for survival. Archaeologists once believed the Terracotta Army represented soldiers meant to serve the emperor in the afterlife. But perhaps they served another purpose, a desperate attempt to store memory, to make sure the world would remember how it once looked, felt, and believed. Today, our devices hold that same ambition. We back up our photos, our words, our moments not because we fear losing them, but because we fear losing ourselves. The machines have become our tombs of preservation. Yet, as the emperor learned, immortality by replication is a fragile illusion. The pigments that once gave the soldiers color faded the moment they met the air. Exposure erased their brightness. What was meant to preserve decayed in the act of revelation. Our digital creations face the same paradox every update. Every migration, every failed drive erodes the permanence we promise ourselves. Eternity, it seems, does not favor perfection. It favors mystery. The narrator's voice turns quieter, as if addressing the listener directly. We believe we are saving ourselves in data, but perhaps, like him, we are only building new tombs. Still, there is a strange beauty in it, this endless human loop of remembering and forgetting. The Emperor's clay soldiers and our digital ones share a tender truth. Both are born from love and fear, love of life, fear of loss. Every archive, every sculpture, every saved file is a gesture of care, an attempt to keep something from dissolving into time. The difference lies only in material. His was earth, ours is electricity. But the emotion is the same heartbeat beneath both. Perhaps the Emperor's artisans felt it too, that quiet ache as they moulded each hand, each face. They knew the clay would not live, yet they shaped it as if it could. We do the same when we upload our memories, hoping the act itself will grant meaning, even if the result cannot speak. The impulse to remember is not rational, it is sacred. It binds us across millennia, across civilizations. The camera lingers on the rows of statues again, the dim light shifting across their weathered forms. Clay and code, the narrator says softly. Different languages, same prayer. What connects them is not technology, but longing, the yearning to be witnessed, to matter beyond our vanishing. Each statue, each bite, is a whisper into eternity. Don't forget me. And yet, perhaps forgetting is what keeps meaning alive. The terracotta soldiers remind us that it is the act of preservation, not the permanence of it, that makes humanity beautiful. When the lights dim over the museum floor and the servers hum unseen across the world, both the clay and the code continue their quiet vigil, fragile, flawed, and eternal in intent. The narrator pauses, letting the silence rest. Every statue, they murmur, was an ancient upload of a soul, and every file we save is a modern echo of that same faith that memory, though silent, will one day speak again. As the image fades, the story begins to shift outward, away from emperors and technology, towards something larger. The question becomes not how we remember, but why. What does this endless pattern of preservation reveal about us? What are we trying to protect, our history, our identity, or the fragile illusion that we are more than temporary? The whisper fades into darkness. The soldiers are sleeping, the servers are humming, and between them, humanity keeps dreaming of forever. Not every truth wants to be known. In a world obsessed with remembering, forgetting feels like failure. We archive, document, and preserve, terrified that something precious might slip through our fingers. Yet, there is a gentler truth beneath this urgency. Sometimes, forgetting is mercy. The earth knows this well. It covered the terracotta soldiers for 2,000 years, not to destroy them, but to protect them. The soil became their blanket, the centuries their sleep. The emperor's dream of eternity was granted not through remembrance, but through silence. The narrator's voice drifts like dusk over the plain. The clay slept as we do not dead, only dreaming. When we dig into the past, we often think we are rescuing it. But perhaps we are only waking what needed to rest. The farmers who uncovered the first warrior did not know they were breaking a long and tender peace. What they called discovery might have been interruption. Beneath every revelation lies a quiet trespass, a moment when curiosity outweighs reverence. The Terracotta Army reminds us that the world keeps its balance not only through what is preserved, but through what is allowed to fade. In the museum light, the soldiers stand restored yet subdued, their stillness deeper than before. The dust that once covered them has been brushed away, but the silence remains unbroken, watchful. They are no longer forgotten, but they are no longer alone either. Millions of eyes meet their gaze each year, yet none can restore the solitude they once had. What we call history is often the transformation of peace into spectacle. The mercy of forgetting is that it spares us that noise. Forgetting is not erasure, it is transformation. The fallen leaves rot to feed the forest. The setting sun forgets the light it gave, and still the world blooms. Even the human mind, fragile as it is, forgets not to betray, but to survive. To remember everything would be unbearable, grief without end, memory without meaning. The mind knows what the heart cannot. That peace requires absence. Just as night must follow day, forgetting must follow knowing. Perhaps that is why the clay soldiers stir something deeper than awe, a tenderness for what we have lost and what we must continue to lose. They are memory turned into sleep. Time, with infinite patience, softened their colours, dulled their edges, erased the brushstrokes of their makers. And yet, in that erosion, they became more beautiful, not pristine, but eternal in their incompleteness. The mercy of forgetting lies in this gentle surrender, in allowing what once was to return quietly to dust. The narrator continues in a voice almost like a lullaby. The earth is not cruel when it forgets. It is kind. It makes room for what must come next. Every civilization must learn this mercy anew. Rome collapsed, its marble buried beneath grass. The Maya cities were swallowed by vines. The great libraries burned, their ashes rising like prayers into the wind. And yet, from those losses came renewal. New stories, new languages, new art born from the quiet aftermath. Oblivion, it seems, is not the enemy of creation, but its companion. Without forgetting, there would be no room to dream. In our age of constant memory, we have lost this rhythm. We hold too tightly to images, to data, to ghosts of moments that were never meant to linger. We confuse permanence with meaning, forgetting that even stars must die to give birth to light. The more we cling to everything, the less we truly feel anything. The mercy of forgetting reminds us that impermanence is not punishment, but design the world's way of teaching us how to let go. The narrator pauses, letting silence breathe. The emperor wanted to remember everything, they say softly, and so he built an army to hold his fear. But the earth, wiser than any king, chose to forget. It covered his dream with soil and sleep, and in doing so, kept it safe. In that act lies a profound lesson. What endures is not the memory, but the rhythm, the rise and fall, the creation and the loss. The Terracotta Army stands today not because the emperor succeeded in defying death, but because time, in its mercy, allowed his failure to soften into beauty. The soldiers are not proof of immortality, they are proof of forgiveness. At night, when the lights in the museum dim and the visitors are gone, the silence that returns is not empty. It feels like a continuation of that ancient sleep, the world remembering how to forget again. Dust settles over clay, as it always has. The air cools. The centuries, like tides, wash gently over the still forms, as if tucking them back beneath the folds of time. Forgetting, then, is not the end of story, but its renewal. It allows the past to rest, the present to breathe, and the future to begin. The Emperor sought to capture eternity by freezing it. The earth understood that eternity is movement, the slow exhale of all things that once were and will be again. As the narrator's voice fades, it leaves behind a quiet blessing. To forget is not to lose, it is to return. The camera lingers one last time on the soldiers' faces, serene, patient, dusted with light. Their eyes, though empty, seem to hold a peace no memory could ever capture. The clay sleeps as we do, trusting the world to remember what it must and release the rest. The whisper lingers, soft as the breath of soil. Perhaps the truest immortality is not being remembered forever, but being forgotten kindly. And with that, the story begins to slow, turning gently toward its final meditations on mystery, on mercy, and the timeless grace of not needing to know. The earth remembers more gently than we do. Where we cling, it cradles. Where we rush to preserve, it allows to fade. The clay that shaped the Emperor's army remembers not through precision, but through touch. The warmth of hands long turned to dust, the rhythm of breath once steady over the workbench. Each fingerprint, still pressed into the hardened surface, is a trace of a life that never sought glory, only completion. The soldiers may stand for an emperor, but their truer monument lies in the invisible devotion of those who made them. The narrator's voice is soft, slow, the kind that feels like night settling over memory. The hands that shaped these faces did not think of eternity, it says. They thought only of the day's work, of the coolness of the clay, of getting the expression just right before the torch burned out. This is the quiet paradox at the heart of the Terracotta Army. What was built for one man's immortality now speaks for everyone else's impermanence. The Emperor is gone, his name reduced to echo, but the artisans remain in every curve, every detail, every small imperfection that outlived his command. Their work, humble and unrecorded, has become the truest record of the world they knew. A record written not in ink or data, but in patience. The clay remembers what history forgets: the roughness of a sculptor's thumb, the uneven cut of a tool, the slight tilt of a head shaped by fatigue rather than design. These details are not errors. They are humanity itself, preserved in mineral form. They remind us that even the grandest monuments are made by hands that trembled, by hearts that hoped for rest at the end of the day. The soldiers stand now as an army of memory, not of conquest, but of craftsmanship. In their stillness, we sense not war, but care. The tilt of a chin, the fold of a robe, the knot of a belt, each gesture speaks of a human being trying to make something last. Yet time, with its quiet mercy, has softened even that ambition. The paint has flaked away, the features have eroded. What remains is not a defiance of decay, but a conversation with it. The clay, the narrator murmurs, does not remember words. It remembers pressure. It remembers the shape of effort, the trace of intention. And perhaps that is enough. When archaeologists brush dust from the soldiers' faces, they are not uncovering perfection, they are uncovering persistence. Every layer of soil removed reveals the persistence of memory and matter itself. The earth had held these figures like a secret, keeping them safe not from time, but through it. There is something deeply comforting in that the thought that even after centuries of storms, wars, and silence, the ground still remembers how to protect what was once loved. The Terracotta Army, then, is not just an artifact. It is an act of faith. It is proof that creation, no matter how fragile, leaves a trace. The sculptors who shaped these warriors never knew their names would be forgotten, or that their work would one day become sacred. Yet somehow, their devotion endured beyond the empire that commanded it. Their art survived because it carried no arrogance, only care. In this, the clay becomes our mirror. It reminds us that what endures is not the grand or the powerful, but the simple and sincere. A hand shaping the earth in silence can speak across ages louder than any king. The emperor's monuments fell, his palaces turned to dust, but the touch of an unnamed craftsman outlived him, whispering through time with more tenderness than any proclamation carved in stone. The narrator's tone deepens, reverent but calm. The earth remembers gently because it remembers truth without judgment. It keeps what was made with care, and releases what was made with pride. As the light shifts across the rows of soldiers, Each face seems to hold a fragment of humanity's long conversation with time. The same one that built pyramids, painted caves, carved idols, and now stores dreams in code. Every era leaves behind its fingerprints, not knowing which will endure. The Emperor sought control over eternity. His artisans gave eternity to humility. The clay remembers the rhythm of fingers smoothing a brow, the sound of sandals brushing dust across the workshop floor, the faint hum of a song sung to pass the endless hours of shaping and firing. Those moments were small, invisible, unrecorded, and yet they are what remain. In a way, the army does not belong to the Emperor anymore. It belongs to the earth, and to the quiet persistence of human creation. The narrator reflects, perhaps that is how the world remembers, not in names but in gestures, not in kings but in hands. This idea unfolds slowly, like the turn of a page. Memory, the story suggests, is not about preservation alone. It is about translation, how one generation's devotion becomes another's wonder. The soldiers were never meant to be seen by living eyes, yet their rediscovery gave them new meaning. Their silence became a voice. Their stillness became movement in the hearts of those who looked upon them. And so, through clay, humanity continues its oldest ritual, remembrance through creation. Whether it is a brushstroke, a sculpture, a melody, or a story told before sleep, each act of making becomes a small defiance of impermanence. The Terracotta Army stands as the echo of that defiance, not proud, but patient. The narrator's voice lowers, barely above a whisper. The Emperor tried to command eternity, but eternity chose the hands that obeyed. Perhaps that is what the clay remembers most. Not the command of the powerful, but the endurance of the gentle. The earth, after all, has no allegiance. It keeps what is sincere and lets the rest dissolve. It remembers the heartbeat behind the hammer, the breath behind the fire, the faith behind the silence. As the scene fades, the soldiers appear less as artifacts and more as participants, in a dream that continues to unfold, a dream of creation, of devotion, of the beautiful futility of trying to last forever. And just before the darkness closes in, the narrator leaves the listener with a final whisper. The earth remembers more gently than we do, and perhaps that is why its memory lasts. The music lingers, soft as dust, carrying us toward the next question. If the clay remembers, what sleeps still beneath it? Some doors are meant to stay closed. Deep beneath the fields of Xi'an lies a chamber that has never seen the light, a vault sealed more completely than any in human history. It is the resting place of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, a tomb so vast and mysterious that even modern science hesitates before it. For decades, archaeologists have stood at its threshold, equipped with tools capable of revelation, and yet they do not open it. The silence remains deliberate, a pact between the living and the dead. The narrator's voice is low and slow, like breath moving through stone. We can scan it, we can measure it, but we cannot touch it, not yet. According to ancient texts, the emperor's burial chamber was designed as a perfect reflection of his empire. The ceiling, a map of constellations. The floor, rivers of mercury flowing through bronze mountains. Crossbows rigged to fire upon intruders. A miniature cosmos meant to mirror the heavens and to warn against trespass. These legends were long dismissed as myth, until scientists detected unnaturally high concentrations of mercury in the surrounding soil. The old stories, it seemed, were not merely poetic. They were chemical truth. The tomb calls to curiosity yet resists it. In a world that prides itself on knowing everything, it remains one of the last places untouched by human hands. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and soil analysis have traced its shape, mapped its corridors, and hinted at its treasures. But the decision stands. To open it would risk destroying what cannot be replaced. The air inside, undisturbed for 2,000 years, may crumble paintings, dissolve silk, or release toxins. One breath of modernity could erase an entire world preserved in silence. For archaeologists, this dilemma is not scientific but spiritual. To open the tomb would satisfy the mind's hunger but betray the heart's reverence. The narrator reflects softly. Discovery is not always progress. Sometimes, to preserve wonder, we must choose ignorance. It is a haunting paradox. The emperor who sought eternity still rules, not through power, but through restraint. His tomb commands the living by forbidding entry, The same ruler who demanded control over death now dictates silence over the centuries that followed him. The soldiers above guard him still, their watch unbroken. And perhaps that is how he intended it to remain forever beyond reach, the one secret history could never fully claim. In recent years, scientists and historians have debated the ethics of intrusion. Should knowledge override reverence? Should curiosity outweigh peace? Every argument circles back to the same uneasy truth. We are not always ready to face what we seek. The unknown is not merely a gap in data, it is a boundary between worlds. Inside that sealed chamber lies not only history, but intention, the Emperor's final wish, cast in clay and metal, commanding stillness. Some suggest that waiting is wisdom, that future generations, armed with gentler technologies, might one day enter without harm. Others whisper that the tomb should remain sealed forever, a monument to restraint in an age of endless revelation. There is something sacred in the thought that one of humanity's greatest wonders still sleeps untouched. It reminds us that mystery has value, that not everything exists to be opened, measured, explained. The narrator pauses, allowing the idea to sink in like dust, settling in dark air. Perhaps the truest respect we can offer the past is to let it rest. The soil above the tomb continues to breathe, faintly shifting with the seasons. Rain falls, roots spread, the earth keeps its promise. Below, in perfect silence, the Emperor's world endures a civilization folded into itself, waiting for no one. The chamber may contain untold treasures, but its greatest treasure may be its secrecy. For in that sealed space, time has achieved what humanity never could: perfect preservation through stillness. To open it would be to end that perfection. Every discovery, no matter how careful, would become an act of undoing. The lights, the cameras, the air itself, all would break the spell that has lasted longer than most civilizations. The Emperor's dream of eternity would dissolve in a moment of revelation. And so, for now, the chamber remains closed. The instruments stay silent. The scientists, usually impatient for answers, speak here in whispers. In their restraint, there is reverence, a recognition that knowledge has its cost. The narrator's tone turns meditative. Perhaps the lesson of the sealed chamber is not what lies within, but why it must remain hidden. The unknown, untouched, keeps the world from losing its wonder. Above ground, tourists walk among the soldiers, photographing what has been revealed. But deep beneath their footsteps lies a secret that has refused spectacle. It waits not to be found, but to be remembered as a symbol of the balance between knowing and not knowing, between discovery and mercy. The scene closes in quiet reflection. The camera lingers on the grassy mound that conceals the tomb, unremarkable, serene, indifferent to our curiosity. The narrator's final words for the section echo like a lullaby for the unseen. Some doors are meant to stay closed, not to hide from us, but to protect what still dreams within. The music fades to a single sustained note, a tone of reverence and release. The audience is left not with frustration, but calm acceptance. The greatest mystery, it seems, is the one that continues to sleep. And as the night deepens, the story begins to drift toward its final movement, the philosophical ending, where discovery gives way to understanding, and silence becomes its own kind of truth. Mystery keeps eternity alive. Beneath the quiet hills of Xi'an, where the earth still refuses to give up its final secret, something deeper than archaeology endures. The Emperor's tomb, untouched and unseen, has become more than a relic. It is a meditation on the unseen itself. Every century that passes without revelation adds to its power. It is a reminder that sometimes beauty grows not from exposure, but from restraint. The narrator's voice settles into the rhythm of breath, calm, contemplative, almost reverent. We look at the mound of earth, they say, and what we see is nothing. Yet within that nothingness, our imagination blooms. The sealed chamber holds no visible art, no open treasure, no spectacle, and yet it may be the most mesmerizing place on earth. What captivates us is not what we know, but what we can never quite see. The unseen invites the mind to wander. It creates space for wonder to live. The more complete the mystery, the more complete the peace it offers. Humanity, for all its knowledge, still hungers for what cannot be measured, the whisper beyond the wall, the light behind the curtain. Perhaps that is the tomb's truest gift. It does not show, It suggests. It teaches us that revelation is not the same as understanding. In an age of constant exposure, where every secret is pursued until it breaks, the Emperor's resting place reminds us of the grace of holding back. To leave something unknown is not ignorance, it is respect. The camera lingers over the silent mound. No movement, no colour, no voice, only wind. And yet within that stillness, there is a living presence, as if the earth itself were guarding a sacred thought. The narrator continues softly. Some beauty exists only because it remains untouched. The moment we open it, it changes. Every civilization eventually learns this truth that mystery sustains meaning. The great pyramids, the Sphinx, the unbroken tombs of forgotten kings, their silence is what gives them power. To know everything would be to end the spell. The unseen allows eternity to breathe, to remain larger than comprehension. Qin Shi Huang's tomb has become a kind of mirror for the human spirit, a place where restraint transforms into reverence. Even science, with its relentless curiosity, pauses here. Researchers who dedicate their lives to discovery stand at this boundary and feel something older than reason awe. They understand that not all knowledge is meant to be harvested. There are things that lose their essence when brought to light, truths that live only in shadow. The Emperor's tomb is one such truth, not a puzzle to be solved, but a prayer to be left unanswered. The narrator's tone softens, like the hush of falling ash. Mystery, after all, is the soul's way of remembering the infinite. To live without mystery is to live without wonder, to see only what is measurable and forget what is meaningful. The Terracotta Army gave the world a glimpse of eternity's artistry. The unopened tomb preserves eternity's humility. Together, they form a balance, revelation and restraint, sight and silence, knowing and not knowing. It is within that balance that beauty becomes timeless. The unseen also invites reflection. When we look at what is hidden, we are forced to look inward, to find meaning not in what is shown, but in how we imagine it. The sealed tomb becomes a metaphor for our own inner chambers, the memories, fears, and hopes we keep buried, not out of shame, but out of care. There is dignity in privacy, strength in silence. The world outside may demand confession, but the soul, like the Emperor's resting place, needs its shadows to remain whole. Every person, the narrator says softly, carries their own sealed chamber, the part of themselves that no one else will ever fully see. And perhaps that is where our truest treasures lie. As the music deepens, the story feels less historical and more universal. The mystery of the tomb becomes the mystery of being. To accept the unseen is to accept that life will always exceed understanding, that the most profound truths are not revealed through knowledge, but through quiet recognition. The narrator reflects, what we cannot see gives depth to what we can. Darkness gives meaning to light. Silence gives shape to sound. The unseen makes beauty possible. Above the hidden chamber, the seasons turn as they always have. Spring rain nourishes the soil. Summer heat breathes through the grass. Beneath it all, the Emperor's world remains unchanged. An entire kingdom of stillness, unobserved yet enduring. And perhaps that is the purest form of eternity, to exist without witness, unmeasured, unspoken, alive only in the imagination of those who believe. The camera slowly pulls back, showing the distant hills fading into dusk. The mound becomes smaller, less distinct, until it merges with the horizon, a perfect circle between earth and sky. The narrator's final words for the section arrive like a sigh, both farewell and benediction. Mystery keeps eternity alive. For what is unseen is never lost. It only waits, quietly, to be dreamed again. The music fades into near silence, a long, fading note that feels like breath returning to stillness. The screen darkens, leaving only the sound of wind and the echo of that thought. And as the audience drifts in that calm, the story begins to turn gently toward its final reflection from the Emperor's hidden world to our own. What does it mean, after all, to live surrounded by mysteries we cannot open? And why do we find peace in leaving them closed? Every secret waits for a future kind enough to find it. Across the span of centuries, humanity has lived by a quiet rhythm, concealment, forgetting, rediscovery. We bury what we fear to face, what we cannot yet understand, and what we wish to protect from time's erosion. Yet somehow, the earth never keeps our silences forever. The soil returns what we hide, reshaped and reinterpreted, like a message rewritten by history itself. The Terracotta Army is only one echo of this ancient habit, a reminder that every act of hiding carries within it the hope of being found. The narrator speaks with calm reverence, the tone slow and reflective. What we bury, we do not abandon. We entrust it. Long before the emperor's tomb, people were already whispering into the ground. In caves and under temples they left offerings, bones, tools, words carved into stone. These were not just relics of survival, they were messages for the unseen. Burial was not simply loss, it was communication. To bury something was to believe in the future, to trust that someone, someday, would uncover it and understand. That instinct, tender and universal, endures in every age. We bury our dead, our memories, our stories. We seal time capsules, preserve photographs, send golden records into space. Even in a world that worships exposure, we still hide not out of shame, but love. We hide what matters most because it feels sacred, fragile, too easily broken by the noise of the present. The narrator continues softly. We are not only the species that remembers, we are the species that keeps. The act of keeping is as powerful as the act of forgetting. Civilizations rise upon the foundations of both. When the great library of Alexandria burned, knowledge vanished. But so did arrogance, the illusion that we could own truth. In losing, we learned again to seek. When cities sink into sand, their rediscovery becomes renewal. Each loss is a kind of cleansing, allowing the next stage to begin not with possession but with wonder. Human history moves like the tide, concealment and revelation, each necessary to the other. Too much exposure, and meaning fades. Too much secrecy, and memory dies. Between them lies the balance that allows beauty to endure. The Terracotta Army survived precisely because it was hidden. It was the burial, not the unveiling, that preserved it. What we keep safe in darkness often shines brighter when finally seen. The narrator's tone shifts slightly, contemplative but serene. We think of forgetting as failure, but perhaps forgetting is the Earth's way of making room for remembering anew. In every heart, this pattern repeats. We bury our pain until we are ready to heal it. We hide parts of ourselves not to deceive, but to protect what is still forming. The secrets we carry are not betrayals of truth. They are incubations of meaning. The same hand that covers a seed with soil does not condemn it to darkness. It gives it a chance to grow. And so, we might look at the Emperor's sealed chamber, not as defiance of time, but as a mirror of our own nature. Humanity, like that tomb, holds chambers within chambers, some open, some sealed, some we have forgotten how to find. Beneath the surface of every civilization and every soul lie worlds asleep, waiting for gentler eyes. Perhaps, the narrator murmurs, that is what the earth teaches us through its patience, that nothing is truly lost, only waiting for the right season to be found. When archaeologists uncovered the Terracotta Army, they did not only awaken an empire's memory, they reminded us that the past is not gone, merely sleeping. The emperor's soldiers were not preserved by power, but by silence. The centuries of darkness became their sanctuary, and when the time was right, the world above had grown quiet enough to listen again. This, too, is the pattern of the human spirit. We rush to reveal, to analyze, to claim, and then, when the noise overwhelms, we begin again, seeking stillness, seeking meaning. The things we bury are not always mistakes. Sometimes they are simply waiting for us to mature enough to see them clearly. The narrator reflects. Every rediscovery is a conversation across time. The buried speaks, and the living must learn how to listen. That listening requires humility. When we dig, we are not rescuing the past. We are being received by it. The earth allows us entry only when we approach softly. The emperor's tomb, still sealed, still guarded by clay, reminds us that revelation must be earned, that understanding cannot be forced. In this way, humanity's relationship with secrecy becomes an act of trust. The world hides its truths not to punish us, but to protect them, to let us find them when we are ready to carry their weight. Every discovery, from lost cities to forgotten words, happens precisely when it must. The same might be said of our own inner revelations. The truths we find about ourselves arrive not when we demand them, but when we can hold them gently. The narrator's tone deepens, carrying a softness that feels almost like forgiveness. To bury is not to end. To find is not to conquer. Between the two lies grace. The beauty of the Terracotta Army lies not only in what it reveals, but in what it teaches that time itself is a keeper of secrets, and that patience is the language of preservation. The Emperor may have sought immortality through command, but what endured was something quieter, the enduring faith of those who built, buried, and waited. As the camera drifts again over the silent fields of Xi'an, the narrator concludes, "We bury what we cannot hold, we keep what we cannot bear to lose. And sometimes, if we are lucky, the earth returns, it changed, softened, ready to be understood." The final image lingers, wind brushing across grass that conceals eternity beneath it. The unseen world sleeps, untroubled by time, knowing that someday someone will listen again. And in that silence, the story begins to turn toward its final truth. Not about emperors or armies, but about us. How every secret we keep is a reflection of our longing to endure, and how acceptance, not discovery, is what finally brings peace. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only kept. In the quiet spaces of history, between discovery and forgetting, there lives a softer kind of secrecy. Not the secrecy of fear, power, or control, but of care. The narrator's tone slows to a whisper, the rhythm now almost like breathing. We preserve what we love, even when that means leaving it in the dark. This is the heart of the gentle mysteries, the secrets that exist, not to hide truth, but to protect its tenderness. For thousands of years, the Terracotta Army slept beneath the soil, untouched by light or greed. Its silence was not defiance, it was devotion. What we call secrecy may, in truth, be love's most enduring form, the instinct to shield what cannot bear exposure. When the Emperor ordered his clay soldiers buried, he might have been trying to cheat death. But those who made them, the craftsmen, the labourers, the nameless hands, gave their work a quieter purpose. They made beauty that would never be seen. That kind of creation is not ambition, it is faith. The camera glides through darkness, brushing against fragments of colour faded by centuries. The narrator reflects, perhaps that is the highest form of art, to make something exquisite and then let it vanish. The terracotta figures were never meant for applause or memory. Their perfection was private, their silence deliberate, and somehow that secrecy made them eternal. This is the paradox the modern world often forgets. We live surrounded by noise, every thought broadcast, every image exposed. We equate visibility with value, as though to be unseen were to be unreal. Yet the unseen has always been the soul's refuge. The most beautiful moments are breath shared in love, a prayer whispered to no one, a memory that lives only in the heart, gain their meaning precisely because they remain unspoken. The narrator's voice becomes softer still, almost like a lullaby. Not all truth wants to be known. Some truth only wants to be held. The gentle mysteries of the world, the unopened tomb, the unrecorded song, the unspoken kindness remind us that secrecy is not the enemy of connection. It is its shelter. To keep something hidden is sometimes to keep it whole. The emperor's tomb stands not only as a symbol of power, but as a monument to the quiet act of preservation. In its sealed chamber lies an idea that modernity struggles to remember, that love often means restraint. Even nature follows this wisdom. Seeds must rest in darkness before they bloom. Night must fall before dawn. The hidden is not lifeless. It is preparation, incubation, becoming. So too with the mysteries of history and of the heart. To leave something unsolved is to allow it to continue growing. The Terracotta Army survives because the world learned for once to wait. In that patience, there is tenderness. Archaeologists could dig faster, reveal more, but they choose reverence over conquest. Their restraint is a kind of love for the past, for beauty, for the idea that some stories deserve silence. The narrator reflects, to understand is not always to open. Sometimes it is simply to listen to what remains closed. And so we return to the theme that has flowed through the story since the beginning. That secrecy, when born of fear, imprisons. But when born of affection, it protects. The gentle mysteries are those we guard not because we must, but because we wish to keep them safe from the hunger of the world. Every civilization has practiced this delicate art. The monks who locked away sacred texts until the world was ready. The artists who burned unfinished works rather than let them be misunderstood. The lovers who kept their letters unmailed, trusting that some feelings are too pure to survive translation. In their restraint, there is grace, a humility that recognizes that not everything exists for the eyes of others. The Terracotta Army, sealed for 2,000 years, becomes the perfect emblem of that grace. It teaches us that secrecy can be serenity, that protection can be poetry. What is hidden need not be lost. It can be cherished in quiet remembrance. The soldiers, the emperor, the artisans, all remain suspended in their silent dialogue, untouched yet alive in imagination. Their mystery invites us not to conquer the unknown, but to love it. The narrator's final words for this section carry a warmth that feels like closure, but not conclusion. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only kept. Because in keeping them, we remember that beauty, like love, is not in the knowing but in the care we take not to break it. The music fades into stillness. The image of the sealed tomb returns one last time, not as a monument, but as a gesture. Gentle, protective, eternal. And from this silence, the story begins its final turn. A closing meditation on what secrecy, mystery, and memory truly mean for us, here and now, in a world that has forgotten how to rest. The past does not die, it dreams. Beneath every city, every step, and every heartbeat, history continues to breathe in its sleep. The narrator's voice softens to a hush, the tone slow and luminous, as if speaking not to the viewer but to the earth itself. We think of history as finished, they murmur, but perhaps it only rests waiting for gentler hands to wake it again. In the stillness, after centuries of struggle, conquest, and rediscovery, there comes a kind of peace. The monuments crumble, the empires fade, the names dissolve into wind. What remains is quieter, a pulse beneath the soil, the hum of time remembering itself. The Terracotta Army lies beneath Xi'an, not as ruins but as dreamers. Unbroken, unforgotten, unending. Their sleep is not death, but devotion, a long, patient keeping of memory. The camera drifts once more across the fields where the first farmer's shovel struck clay. The soil gleams faintly in moonlight, the same earth that once bore armies and emperors. Above, the world turns indifferently. Below, 1,000 eyes remain closed, serene. The narrator continues, "Perhaps that is the true mercy of time, that it lets our greatest efforts rest until they are ready to be remembered. Every civilization must eventually surrender to silence. The noise of victory, the cries of faith, the voices that once declared eternity all fade. But the silence that follows is not empty. It is full of echoes, folded like sleep around the remnants of our becoming. History does not vanish. It exhales, quietly, into those who listen. We imagine that we uncover the past, but perhaps it is the past that uncovers us, choosing the moment when our curiosity becomes gentle enough, our hearts humble enough, to receive what it has kept. When the terracotta warriors emerged from darkness, they did not shout their story. They waited for us to grow still enough to hear it. Their patience outlasted our noise. The narrator's tone becomes almost meditative. What we call discovery is often just awakening, not of things but of understanding. Every brushstroke of the archaeologist, every whisper of dust lifted from a soldier's face, is an act of tenderness. It is the meeting of two dreams, the dream of those who built, and the dream of those who seek. Between them lies the quiet recognition that everything we touch, even after millennia, still lives in its own way. The clay that once held fingerprints now holds eternity. The music deepens slow strings, like breathing beneath stone. The narrator continues, "History sleeps so that we may learn how to wake it without breaking it." The sleep of history is not a forgetting, it is a rhythm. Like tides, it withdraws so that it may return renewed. What seems lost becomes nourishment for what follows. The ruins of one empire become the foundation for another. The forgotten songs of one age become the myths of the next. Through this endless sleep and waking, humanity learns humility, the realization that no achievement is final and no silence permanent. In the darkness beneath Xi'an, the soldiers still stand guard over a man who sought forever. Yet in their stillness, they have found what he could not: peace. They do not fight, they do not age, they do not ask to be seen. Their purpose is fulfilled not in movement, but in being. They have become what the emperor desired, an echo of eternity, but in a form he never imagined: tranquil, forgotten, perfect. The narrator reflects. Perhaps this is what all our stories are leading toward, not immortality of flesh, but of meaning, not the conquest of time, but harmony with it. And so the terracotta warriors, the emperor's lost kingdom, the silence of the centuries, all merge into one vast lullaby. History, once feared as a grave, reveals itself as a cradle. It holds not the dead, but the dreaming generations asleep in their stories, waiting to be sung awake. The voice lowers again, almost a whisper. Close your eyes, and you can still feel them. The breath of the earth beneath your feet, the memory of hands shaping clay, the heartbeat of centuries listening through stone. Every civilization in the end becomes its own bedtime story told to the future by the patient earth. And when we listen to these stories in the dark, when we let the quiet of the past fold around us, we are no longer separate from it. We become part of the same dream. As the scene fades, the moon rises over the mound that hides the emperor's tomb. The fields shimmer like a sea of memory, endless and still. The narrator's final words linger like the last line of a prayer. History does not end. It rests. And while it rests, it dreams of us. The children of its silence, the keepers of its sleep. The music dissolves into quiet, the image fades to black. All that remains is stillness, and the faint sense that something vast and ancient has just exhaled. Every server is a new tomb of memory. The camera opens on darkness again, not the night sky above Xi'an, but the glow of countless screens in a world that never truly sleeps. Each light hums softly, a constellation of electric stars connected by invisible threads. The narrator speaks with that familiar calm, a whisper between reverence and revelation. We no longer build with stone and clay, we build with data, and in it we bury ourselves. The story of the Terracotta Army was never only about the past. It was a mirror one that reflects, with eerie precision, our modern hunger for preservation. The Emperor's desire for immortality has not vanished. It has changed form. Where he built armies to guard his name, we build networks to guard our identities. Where his artisans molded soldiers from earth, we mold avatars from light. And just as his empire vanished beneath the soil, ours lives beneath the surface of code, vast, invisible, and fragile. The narrator pauses, the tone lowering into reflection. Every civilization dreams of permanence. Ours simply calls it progress. We archive our moments as he once did his monuments. Every photograph, message, search, and memory is carefully stored not in tombs of bronze and lacquer, but in digital vaults humming behind walls of steel and glass. Somewhere, in the sterile air of data centers, our lives are preserved in perfect stillness. These servers, cooled by endless rivers of electricity, are our pyramids, cold, humming, eternal. Yet, like all who came before, we rarely ask the quiet question, preserved for whom? The Emperor built his clay army to stand guard over eternity, believing that what was recorded could never die. Today, we chase the same illusion that memory, once digitized, will outlast the body. But memory, even now, decays. Hard drives fail, formats fade, clouds vanish when no one pays the bill. The digital world, for all its vastness, is still mortal. We just cannot see its erosion. The narrator sighs softly. Even in the cloud, time gathers dust. Still, the impulse is the same, the human refusal to disappear. Every selfie, every archive, every post is a small defiance against oblivion. We no longer embalm emperors, but we embalm experiences, preserving them against the forgetting we secretly fear. And yet, in doing so, we risk something older and subtler, the peace that comes with being forgotten. The more we store, the more we lose our ability to let go. The Emperor sought immortality and found confinement. So, too, may we. There is a strange symmetry in it. The ancient tomb and the modern server farm, both sealed chambers built to contain memory. Inside each, silence hums beneath perfection. But while the Emperor's soldiers sleep in patient stillness, our data never rests. It churns, multiplies, learns. The algorithms that catalogue our lives do not preserve us as we are. They reshape us into what they need. We have given our reflections to machines that no longer mirror truth but interpretation. The narrator's tone deepens. The Emperor wanted to live forever. We want to be remembered forever. and neither of us will know what that truly means. History repeats not through form, but through intent. The same fear that drove kings to build monuments drives us to build profiles. We surround ourselves with echoes, constructing versions of ourselves we can control, statues of thought, carefully polished, endlessly curated. Like the clay soldiers, they face outward in formation, protecting the fragile, unseen truth within, the part of us still afraid to vanish. And yet, the irony endures. The more we record, the less we remember. Information multiplies faster than meaning can follow. What began as preservation has become noise. The digital empire expands not through understanding, but accumulation. We are surrounded by the fragments of our own creation, and in that abundance, we grow strangely hollow. The camera drifts through the sterile corridors of a server hall. Endless rows of blinking lights, each one a heartbeat of stored existence. The narrator murmurs, "We thought eternity would sound like silence, but it hums." Our ancestors built tombs of reverence. We build archives of anxiety. We save everything because we fear losing anything. But in doing so, we have forgotten the gentle wisdom of the earth, that decay is not death, but renewal. The terracotta soldiers endure because their maker let them rest. We cannot rest. Our data lives in constant motion, awake even while we sleep, never allowing our stories to settle into peace. Perhaps that is the cost of modern immortality, an eternity without stillness. But in the quiet reflection of this thought, there is also understanding. Every age, no matter how advanced, eventually becomes its own myth. Just as we look upon the Emperor's clay army with awe and sorrow, some distant civilization may one day unearth our digital ruins, obsolete machines, fragments of language, lost passwords. They will study our traces and wonder who we were, and they will not see technology. They will see longing. The narrator's voice becomes softer now, nearly dreamlike. We are not so different from the emperor who feared the dark. We, too, build our armies of memory. We, too, command them to stand eternal. Perhaps that is what makes the Terracotta Army timeless, not the clay, but the confession hidden within it, that humanity's truest story is not conquest, but the refusal to vanish. We keep building reflections of ourselves, century after century, each one believing it will be the last. The music fades to a single low note, like breath beneath silence. Every server is a new tomb of memory, the narrator repeats. And like all tombs, it waits not for the living to visit, but for the future to listen. The final image is of light fading inside glass, a mirrored screen dimming into black, echoing the soil above Xi'an. The world's newest archive closes its eyes, and the hum becomes still. History, ancient or digital, exhales the same truth. Nothing endures forever, except the desire to. We are the new guardians of silence. The voice of the narrator returns like an echo, soft and steady, no longer distant, no longer speaking about the past, but to the listener directly. The screen fades into darkness. Only the faint hum of wind, as if it were the breath of the earth itself. Every age leaves behind its watchers, the voice says. Those who do not build, nor rule, nor conquer, but listen. It is here that the story begins to fold inward. The Terracotta Army, the Emperor's dream, the centuries of sleep, all become reflections of us. We, the watchers of screens at midnight, are not so different from the farmers who found the first shard of clay. We too dig, quietly and endlessly, through the dust of information, searching for something we cannot name. Every search, every question, every act of wonder is a small excavation not of the world, but of ourselves. The narrator continues, the tone warm and hypnotic. Perhaps the soldiers were never guarding the emperor. Perhaps they were waiting for you. A pause lingers, long enough for the audience to feel their own breathing. To listen, the voice says, is to awaken what history has put to rest. The watchers of old listened to wind through tombs, to whispers carried by dust. We listen to faint signals through cables and code. The sound has changed, but the act has not. In every generation, there are those who sense that truth speaks softly, that the loudest noise in the world is often a distraction from the faint pulse beneath it. Those who find calm in mystery become the caretakers of memory. They keep the balance between revelation and reverence. Maybe that is what the emperor misunderstood, the narrator says. He wanted to be remembered forever. But what he created, this army of silence, became something far greater. It learned to listen, to time, to patience, to the living who would one day kneel beside it in awe. The film slows, showing faces in a museum, visitors standing before the warriors, gazing into the eyes of clay that have seen 2,000 years pass in a single blink. They are not conquerors, they are witnesses, and that is what the narrator gently reveals to the listener, that watching, when done with wonder, is a sacred act. You, the voice says, are part of this story. Every quiet question you carry adds to its breadth. In this age of endless speaking, of voices layered upon voices, to be a listener is an act of rebellion. It is to create space for the world to speak back. The viewers who have stayed until this point, lulled by rhythm and history, are not just audience, they are inheritors. They are the new monks of memory, preserving what cannot be written, the feeling of reverence, the art of stillness, the grace of curiosity. The narrator breathes out a single truth. Silence is not emptiness, it is attention. We do not need temples anymore, or tombs, or armies of clay. We have built a new cathedral, invisible, global, infinite, made of thought and connection. And in that quiet digital glow, each of us becomes a vessel for history's voice. When we pause to listen, truly listen, the centuries unfold not as lessons but as lullabies. The terracotta soldiers stood for a man who sought eternity through command. We stand for something gentler, eternity through understanding. The story has shifted hands. What once belonged to kings now belongs to those who stay awake at night, wondering, dreaming, listening. The voice grows softer. Every age needs its listeners, those who do not rush to know, but wait to feel. Those who keep watch when the rest of the world forgets. You are one of them. The sound of faint wind fades into heartbeat like drums, slow, distant, like footsteps in the soil of time. The narrator continues, almost to themselves now. One day, everything we have built, our screens, our stories, our data will fade, and perhaps, long after, someone will listen again. They will hear this voice, this whisper, and feel less alone. That is how memory survives, not through monuments, but through empathy. The screen glows faintly with the image of the sleeping soldiers once more. Their stillness feels alive. The narrator's final words for this chapter hover between reassurance and farewell. Remember this, the past does not end when it is forgotten. It endures in those who care enough to listen. We are the new guardians of silence. And as long as one person remains awake, listening to the hum beneath history, the world will never truly sleep. The music fades to nothing but breath, the kind that sounds like wind moving through corridors of stone. Then silence, deep, tranquil, endless. They are still there waiting for the next dream. Beneath the quiet fields of Xi'an, where the earth folds softly into its own remembering, the soldiers stand as they always have, unmoving, unblinking, eternal. Their silence is not absence but patience. 2,000 years have passed above them, dynasties, revolutions, satellites, songs yet below. The clay breathes in its own rhythm, untouched by time's noise. The narrator's voice lowers to a whisper. The world changes, but they do not. The clay sleeps still. There is something profoundly human in that stillness. The soldiers were never meant to awaken. They were built to wait not for battle, but for meaning. Each figure remains where a pair of hands once left it, a frozen gesture between creation and rest. The dust that gathers on their shoulders is not decay, but continuity, the same dust that once clung to the fingers of the artisans who shaped them. When we look upon their faces, we do not see the past. We see endurance. The camera glides through the vast chamber once more, row upon row of silent forms, faces half cast in shadow, half touched by light. The narrator speaks softly, as though afraid to disturb them. Perhaps they hear us, the hum of our machines, the breath of our wonder. Perhaps, in their deep and patient sleep, they dream of the world that forgot them and forgive it. History, for all its noise, ends in quiet. The emperor who commanded this army is dust. The empire he built is legend. Yet his wish that life might continue beyond death remains fulfilled, though not as he imagined. The soldiers stand, not as protectors of a vanished ruler, but as guardians of a lesson, that nothing we build can conquer time, but everything we build can become beautiful in surrender to it. The voice becomes even gentler. They were meant to serve one man forever, but in the end, they served us all by teaching us how to rest. It is easy to forget that we too are made of earth. that beneath the noise of cities and screens we share the same stillness. The terracotta warriors do not resist time, they yield to it. And in that yielding, they endure. We are not so different. Our stories, our dreams, our creations, all are small offerings to the same quiet eternity. We write, we build, we love, we fade, and yet something always remains a whisper, a shape, a trace. The narrator pauses. Only the sound of wind through distant corridors remains. To sleep is not to vanish, the voice says. It is to wait for a gentler world. As night falls over Xi'an, the fields look the same as they did before discovery, dark, peaceful, infinite. The world above moves with its ordinary pulse. Traffic, conversation, laughter, forgetting. Below, the army keeps its vigil. The clay breathes through centuries of soil, unhurried, undisturbed. The narrator continues, "Every age has its guardians, some made of flesh, some of stone, some of silence. They do not speak, yet they remind us how to listen." The tone deepens into calm finality. The clay sleeps still, the narrator repeats. And in its sleep, it keeps the world in balance, reminding us that rest is not the opposite of life, but its reflection. The camera lifts slowly from the darkness below to the starlit fields above. The sky mirrors the earth, constellations above, an army beneath. Between them lies the thin layer of soil that separates the living from the timeless. They wait for the next dream, the voice murmurs. And perhaps that dream is ours to remember gently, to build kindly, to leave behind something worth rediscovering. The final words come almost like breath, the kind that happens between sleep and waking, between story and silence. The emperor is gone, the empire is gone, even memory will one day fade, but somewhere beneath the soil, 1,000 faces remain at peace, unbroken, unafraid, untouched. The clay sleeps still, and in its dreaming, it teaches us how to rest. The image fades into darkness, no music, no final revelation, only a lingering hum, as if the earth itself were whispering through the speakers. The sound fades, and with it, the story exhales into silence. The silence beneath your feet has a pulse. Night returns to the fields of Xi'an, the same still plain where the story began. The stars hang low, heavy with memory. The wind moves softly through the grass, bending it like breath against the dark. Nothing stirs on the surface, yet somewhere far below, the world hums with quiet life. The earth itself seems to whisper, not in words, but in rhythm. A pulse older than language, steady and patient, echoing through stone, soil, and clay. The narrator's voice emerges like a sigh. Listen closely. The earth remembers everything we forget. The camera drifts slowly, as if weightless, over the quiet landscape. What lies below remains unseen, but its presence can be felt, like warmth beneath the skin of the world. The narrator continues, "Under these fields, thousands of faces keep their vigil. They do not move, they do not speak, but their silence holds the weight of centuries. What we call stillness is not the absence of life, it is its continuation in another form. There is a calm certainty in this thought. The soldiers may sleep, but the ground around them is alive with invisible exchange, minerals shifting, roots winding through ancient air, the slow compression of centuries folding time into patience. The earth, in its wisdom, does not hurry to reveal what it knows. It holds its stories until we are quiet enough to hear them." The voice softens further. "If you listen long enough, you will hear it too, the hum of what endures, the whisper of what waits." Every civilization has returned to this truth, though few have stayed to dwell in it. Beneath every monument, every city, every dream, lies the same promise that nothing is truly lost, only transformed. The Terracotta Army is not an exception but a mirror. It shows us what remains when ambition dissolves, and silence takes the throne. The clay does not mourn what time has taken. It rests, trusting the earth to keep its secrets until the world is ready to listen again. The narrator's tone grows reflective, gentle as breath. Perhaps that is what the emperor misunderstood. Eternity was never about conquering time. It was about surrendering to it. The night deepens, crickets hum faintly, their rhythm blending with the invisible heartbeat of the soil. The air feels heavy with presence, as though the unseen watchers below are awake, listening to the same sounds they once heard in life. Wind, stars, the slow turning of the world. They do not dream, the voice says softly. They remember. It is easy to forget that the ground beneath us is not still. It shifts, breathes, transforms. Mountains rise and fall, oceans turn to stone. Life becomes memory, and memory, life again. The same dust that once clung to the fingers of the artisans now feeds the roots of the grass above. The emperor who commanded eternity has long since returned to the elements, his power dissolved into the same soil that nourishes the living. And so, the whispering earth continues its endless cycle of giving and taking, remembering and forgetting, never losing, never keeping. Perhaps, the narrator muses, the true immortality of this place is not the emperor's dream, but the earth's forgiveness. A gentle wind stirs the grass, its motion reflecting the unseen movement below roots weaving through chambers, moisture gathering against stone, air rising through the cracks of time. The soil speaks, not in language, but in feeling, a quiet reassurance that everything finds its place again. Even the broken statues, the shattered hands, the fragments of faces, have returned to wholeness within the patient body of the earth. The camera lingers on the horizon, a faint glow marking the coming of dawn. The voice lowers, and so the circle closes. What was buried becomes story. What was forgotten becomes wonder. The earth exhales, and the world begins again. The sound design softens into something barely audible, a pulse, deep and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. You are standing on more than ground, the narrator continues. You are standing on centuries of memory, compressed into silence. Every step you take, every breath you draw, is a conversation with the past. There is comfort in that, the understanding that we, too, will one day join that conversation, our stories folded into the same whispering earth. The terracotta warriors will remain, patient as ever, their forms shifting grain by grain into the landscape. And long after names and nations fade, the soil will still hum with everything that has ever been. The narrator speaks almost to the listener's heartbeat now. The silence beneath your feet has a pulse, and it beats for all that has lived, and all that will live again. As the sky begins to pale, light spills gently across the plain. Mist rises like memory made visible. The world feels cleansed, reborn. What once seemed ancient now feels immediate, not a relic, but a rhythm. The earth does not divide past from present. It weaves them together in one endless breath. The music, soft as a sigh, begins to fade. Perhaps that is the secret the emperor could never capture, the voice says. That eternity does not sleep in tombs or temples, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats where the earth remembers, and we, for a moment, remember too. A final pause. The screen fills with the sight of still fields under breaking dawn. No movement, no sound. Only the faint shimmer of light glancing off soil that has held 1,000 years of silence. The clay sleeps. The narrator whispers. The world wakes, and between them, the earth hums alive, eternal, listening. The hum deepens, fades, and disappears, leaving only quiet. The greatest truths are those gentle enough to hide. As dawn rises over Xi'an, the light softens the edge of the world. The fields shimmer faintly where dew gathers on the grass, and the earth below, ancient, patient, unhurried, lies quiet as breath. The terracotta warriors remain unseen, sealed once more in their dark cathedral beneath the soil. The narrator's voice, calm as morning wind, drifts in. When all the stories are told, something still lingers, not in the words, but in the silence between them. What remains after history finishes speaking? Not glory, nor empire, nor certainty, only longing, the quiet wish that something of us endures. Every civilization, no matter how vast, is built on this same ache. We raise monuments to remember, we write names to resist forgetting, and yet, what we leave behind is never the shape we imagined. The clay soldiers endure, but not as soldiers. The emperor's tomb remains, but not as triumph. What survives of the past is not its perfection, but its humility, the way dust continues to glow even after the fire is gone. The narrator breathes softly, almost like a prayer. What remains is what we loved without understanding. History is a mirror, and like all mirrors, it distorts even as it reveals. The Terracotta Army was meant to be an act of control, a fortress against decay, and yet it became the opposite. Time stripped away its colours, softened its edges, and gave it tenderness, The empire that built it vanished, but the hands that shaped it still speak through their work. In the stillness of those faces, we see ourselves the same hopes, the same fears, the same desire to be remembered. And perhaps that is the mercy of mystery, that what endures does not always explain itself. The unknown spares us the arrogance of believing we know it all. It leaves space for wonder, for reverence, for gentleness. The narrator's tone deepens. If every secret were revealed, the world would lose its breath. Mystery is mercy, it keeps the soul alive. We spend our lives searching for answers, and yet, when we find them, they never satisfy for long. What truly moves us are the questions that remain the quiet spaces where truth sleeps softly, just beyond reach. The terracotta warriors remind us that silence can be sacred. Not every mystery calls to be solved. Some simply ask to be seen, then left in peace. The light over the fields grows warmer. Dust drifts lazily through the morning air, turning gold in the sun. What remains, the narrator continues, is not the monument, but the moment, the breath between discovery and understanding. Humanity endures in that moment, the fragile instant between knowing and not knowing, between holding and letting go. We have spent centuries trying to outlast time, but perhaps survival was never the point. Perhaps what matters is how gently we exist within it. The emperor reached for immortality through conquest. The artisans reached it through creation. And we, as listeners, find it through remembrance, through the act of stillness. The world above the tomb stirs voices of farmers, archaeologists, visitors. Life continues as it always has, unaware of the vast dream resting just below. The narrator smiles within the tone. The earth keeps its promises. What we bury in reverence, it returns in beauty. There is a tenderness in endings, a soft recognition that nothing truly ends. Even now the soldiers wait beneath the soil, their stillness echoing the calm of eternity. They do not ask to be known. They ask to be remembered kindly. That is all history asks of us, not understanding, but compassion. The camera pans slowly across the empty field one last time. The grass moves like a slow tide. The hum beneath the ground grows faint, almost imperceptible. The narrator's voice lowers to a murmur. We chase permanence through monuments, through memory, through machines. But what remains is simpler, the quiet proof that we once cared enough to build. And in that care, that fragile, fleeting act of devotion, humanity finds its truest reflection. The emperor sought eternity in command. The artisans found it in creation. We find it in listening. It is not power that survives the ages, but tenderness. The same tenderness that shapes clay, that buries the dead, that looks at ruins and still feels awe. The music swells softly, not triumphant, but serene. What remains, the narrator says, is not what we keep, but what keeps us. The wind gathers once more, carrying the scent of earth, rain, and time. The screen fades slowly to black. The soldiers sleep, the voice whispers, and so does history. But the whisper of their making endures quiet, eternal, and kind. Every secret ends in silence. The voice returns softer now, almost part of the air, barely above a whisper. The clay sleeps, it says, and so shall you. The camera lingers on the horizon as dusk gathers once more over Xi'an. The day exhales into twilight, and the fields turn from gold to grey to blue. Somewhere beneath, the terracotta warriors stand unchanged, untouched, and unbothered by the turning of the world. Their silence feels deeper now, not empty, but full, as though the earth itself is breathing with them. The narrator speaks slowly, with the calm cadence of a lullaby. Every secret ends in silence. Every empire ends in dust. Every story, no matter how vast, folds back into the quiet it came from. The tone is not sorrowful, but serene, a voice that has guided us through centuries now settling into peace. We have followed the emperor through conquest and fear. We have walked among his sleeping soldiers. We have touched the breath of artisans long gone. And now, at the end, there is nothing left to uncover, only to feel. The story, like the clay itself, rests, not in revelation but in stillness. The music beneath the narration softens, as though made of breath and heartbeat. Listen, the voice says. The world is quieter than you think. Beneath its noise, there is always this hum, the sound of time continuing, the murmur of everything that ever was. The final images unfold like memory, a sculptor's hand pressing into clay, the faint glow of a torch in an ancient workshop, the slow burial of a statue beneath falling earth. Each image dissolves into the next, blending centuries into one seamless dream. They are gone, the narrator continues, but their touch remains. Every curve, every crack, every gaze carved into silence. Above, stars bloom over the plain. The night has returned to where it began, vast, patient, endless. We spend our lives chasing what the earth already knows, the voice says. That nothing is truly lost. That every ending is only rest wearing another name. The rhythm of speech slows further, coaxing the listener toward the edge of sleep. Close your eyes, the narrator murmurs. The soldiers are still there. The emperor still dreams. The artisans still breathe through their work. And you are part of that same quiet chain of remembrance. For a moment, there is only the sound of wind, faint, circular, eternal. The narration continues in near whisper. When the world grows loud again, remember this. Beneath your feet, beneath the cities and noise, the earth keeps its secrets kindly. Every heartbeat joins the rhythm of something older, every breath, a thread in the same endless weave. The camera descends once more, through layers of time, soil, roots, stone, until the familiar faces of the clay army emerge in darkness. They stand in perfect rows, unmoving, yet somehow alive. Shadows glide across their eyes. Dust settles like sleep upon their shoulders. The voice returns, softer still. They do not guard the dead. They remind the living to rest. A pause, long, tender, complete. If you listen closely, the narrator adds, you will hear what they have always known, that peace is not silence. It is understanding. The scene fades slowly, the screen turning black. Only the faint hum remains deep and low, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Then, from the dark, one final whisper. The clay sleeps, and so shall you. The words linger. The hum dissolves. A minute of quiet passes before the softest notes of music return not melody, just warmth, as if the sound itself were exhaling. The credits begin to drift across the darkness like falling ash. No rush, no fanfare, only stillness. And somewhere, between sound and silence, the voice returns one last time. Every secret ends in silence, but in that silence, nothing is lost. The whisper continues through earth, through memory, through you. Sleep now, as history sleeps gentle, unafraid, and eternal. The final frame fades completely to black. The music sighs into stillness. Only the silence remains vast, tender, alive.